She was a billionaire. He fixed cars for a living. They were never supposed to meet, until her engine died on a dark highway, and the only person who stopped was the one man who had no idea who she was. Drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. Now stay with me because this one's worth every minute. The garage smelled like motor oil, burnt rubber, and something Ryan Carter had stopped being able to name. Something that used to feel like ambition and had slowly cured into resignation over the past 4 years, hardening around him the way rust hardens around old iron, until the two things become indistinguishable from each other. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, and the last customer had left 40 minutes ago. The fluorescent light above Bay 3 had been flickering since September. Ryan had replaced the bulb twice, and both times the light came back wrong. Not dead, just broken enough to be annoying, pulsing every 15 seconds with the kind of irregular rhythm that got into your head after a while and made it hard to think straight. He'd given up fixing it. Some things, he'd learned, you just learned to work around. He was lying on his back beneath a 2009 Chevy Silverado that belonged to Dale Hutchins, the retired postal worker who lived 2 blocks from the elementary school. Dale brought his truck in every 3 months, whether it needed work or not. Ryan suspected the visits had less to do with maintenance and more to do with the fact that Dale's wife had passed away 2 winters ago and the man had nowhere left to go on Tuesday afternoons. Ryan had stopped charging him full rate 6 months back. He told himself it was just good business, loyal customers and all that. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. Ryan understood loneliness in a way that made it impossible to profit from someone else's. He tightened the bolt on the exhaust manifold, felt the resistance give, checked it again. Underneath the truck, with only the concrete floor and the sound of the rain beginning outside, the world got quiet in a way that Ryan almost appreciated. Quiet was something. Quiet meant he didn't have to perform being okay. His phone buzzed on the rolling toolbox. He already knew who it was. He wiped his hands on his shop rag, slid out from under the truck, and picked it up without enthusiasm. Sarah. Ryan. The date is this Saturday. You told me you wouldn't cancel again. Emma already knows and she's excited. Don't make me drive over there. He stared at the message for a moment, then set the phone face down on the toolbox. Sarah was his younger sister by 3 years. She lived 20 minutes away with her husband and twin boys, and for the past several months she had appointed herself the unsolicited project manager of Ryan's romantic life. The blind date had been her idea. The woman in question was apparently a friend of a friend. Sarah had been frustratingly vague about the details, which Ryan interpreted as a warning sign. Sarah got vague when she thought the specifics would cause him to refuse outright. He picked the phone back up. Ryan. I didn't cancel. I said I'd think about it. Sarah. That's what you say right before you cancel. Saturday, 7 p.m., Meridian Bistro. The reservation is already made. Show up. He set the phone down again. The rain outside was picking up. He could hear it against the metal roof of the garage, a low, steady percussion that had been building since mid-afternoon when the sky started doing something complicated in the west. The weather app had been muttering about a storm system all week, the kind that sweeps in from the Great Lakes and turns everything ugly and cold and inconvenient. Ryan had been too busy to pay much attention to it. He walked to the small office in the back of the garage. More of a converted closet, really, with a desk that was almost entirely buried under invoices, a coffee machine that worked but whose carafe had a hairline crack he'd been meaning to replace for months, and a corkboard on the wall where he pinned important things. The corkboard was half business, half personal, in a way that Ryan had stopped consciously maintaining. There was an overdue notice from the building's property management company. There was a flyer for Emma's soccer team. There was a photo of a woman with dark hair and tired eyes, and a smile that managed to be warm and a little bit exhausted at the same time. Ryan stood in front of the photo for a moment without meaning to. Diane had been gone 4 years. 4 years, 2 months, and somewhere around 16 days, though Ryan had stopped counting the days sometime in the second year because counting the days was doing something to him that he couldn't afford to let continue. She'd died in March, a brain aneurysm. Sudden and total, the kind of thing that didn't give anyone time to prepare or say the right words or settle anything that needed settling. She was 31 years old. Emma had been 10. Ryan had been at the garage, right here in this building, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and a voice he'd never heard before told him to come to St. Catherine's Hospital as quickly as he could. He'd been driving to or from this garage every day since. The photo had been taken on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table the summer before she died. Ryan didn't remember taking it. He'd found it on his phone months after she was gone, scrolling through pictures for reasons he couldn't quite explain, looking for something he wasn't sure existed, and there she was, coffee mug in hand, hair still half undone from sleep, newspaper open in front of her, looking up at the camera with that expression that said, "You and your phone, and I don't entirely mind at the same time." It was the most ordinary photograph in the world. He'd printed it and pinned it to the corkboard, and it had been there ever since. He poured the last inch of coffee from the cracked carafe, drank it cold, and went back out to finish Dale's truck. The house Ryan rented was 7 minutes from the garage by car, 4.5 minutes the way Ryan drove at night when the streets were empty and no one was watching. It was a 2-story brick house on Callaway Street, wide enough for a family of 4 but currently occupied by 2 people who rattled around in it like a pair of pennies in a coffee can. The landlord had offered to move him to something smaller 3 times in the past 2 years. Ryan kept saying he wasn't ready. The truth was that Emma had her room, and her room had been the same room since she was 7, and something in Ryan couldn't quite bring himself to disrupt that particular constant. He came through the back door at 8:47 p.m., which was later than he'd meant to be. The kitchen light was on. The smell of something recently microwaved, pasta probably, the good frozen kind that Emma had strong opinions about, still hung in the air. Emma was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her earbuds in one ear, 14 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's habit of going very still when she was thinking hard about something. She looked up when he came in and pulled the earbud out. "There's pasta in the microwave," she said. "Thanks." He dropped his keys on the counter, pulled off his work jacket. "Homework?" "Done." "Since when?" "6." She gave him a look. "I'm not actually you, Dad. I do things before they're due." "That's an attack on my character." "It's a documented pattern of behavior." She turned back to her laptop, then turned back around. "Aunt Sarah texted me." Ryan opened the microwave. "I figured. She said you're going on a date Saturday." She mentioned it. He took the pasta out, found a fork. "Are you actually going this time?" He sat down at the table across from her. The pasta was some kind of tomato and basil thing. Better than it had any right to be given. It came from a bag. "I don't know yet." Emma looked at him with an expression that was uncomfortably mature, the kind of look that had been appearing on her face more frequently over the past year. The kind that made Ryan feel like the parent-child dynamic in this house had developed certain complications. She had an old soul, people said, which was a kind way of saying that she'd had to grow up quickly and had done so without complaint in a manner that Ryan found both proud-making and quietly heartbreaking. "You should go," she said. "Emma, I'm not saying this for me." She closed the laptop. "I'm saying it because you walk around this house like everything is fine, and then I hear you awake at 3 in the morning going down to the kitchen for water that you don't actually drink." She paused. "I hear things." Ryan set down the fork. "I'm fine," he said. "I know you are," Emma said, in the careful voice of someone who was saying the opposite. "But maybe you could also be a little more fine than that, like, as a direction." He didn't say anything. "The date's probably going to be terrible," she added, more brightly. "But at least it gets Aunt Sarah to stop texting me about it every 4 days." He picked the fork back up. "I'll think about it." Emma put her earbud back in, which was her version of a period at the end of a sentence. Ryan ate his pasta and listened to the rain. The 42nd floor had the kind of view that was supposed to make you feel powerful. Amelia Sinclair had lived with views like this for most of her adult life. The city spread below like a lit circuit board, the river cutting through the west side like something that didn't care about property lines or corporate hierarchies, the dark smudge of clouds gathering on the northern horizon that the meteorology apps were apparently being very cautious about. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office at Sinclair Automotive Group headquarters and watched the clouds build and felt absolutely nothing in particular. This was a new development, or rather, an old development that she'd recently stopped pretending wasn't happening. At 30 years old, Amelia controlled a company that her father had built from a regional dealership network into a billion-dollar enterprise spanning 7 states. He'd handed her the reins 3 years ago when his health started declining. A transition that had been swift and total and slightly terrifying, though Amelia had been too busy surviving it to be terrified at the time. She'd reorganized the executive team, navigated a hostile acquisition attempt from a competitor twice their size, and taken the company into electric fleet management before most of their competitors had finished scheduling the meetings to discuss whether they should. The industry press called her a prodigy. Her competitors called her other things. She called it exhausting and left it at that. Her assistant Marcus appeared in the doorway with the careful posture of someone delivering information they weren't sure would be well received. The Harrington dinner got pushed to 9, and your 7 o'clock confirmed. Meridian Bistro, reservation under your name. The 7 o'clock. The blind date. Thanks, Marcus. He hesitated. Also, Mr. Brennan called again about the Portland acquisition. He says, I know what he says. She turned from the window. Tell him we'll discuss it Thursday. Marcus left with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned, over 2 years of working for Amelia Sinclair, that pressing past a certain point was neither productive nor advisable. Amelia sat down at her desk and looked at the accumulated wreckage of her afternoon. 3 acquisition proposals, a litigation summary, 2 board member correspondence chains, and a 4-page memo from her head of PR about managing her public image during what the memo called the current period of heightened visibility. She'd been photographed at a charity gala in September alongside a tech investor named Garrett, who had turned out, over the following 6 weeks, to be a comprehensive waste of her time and emotional energy. The kind of man who asked thoughtful questions and said the right things and turned out to be fascinated primarily by the reflected glow of proximity to someone wealthy and covered. Amelia had ended it in early October via a conversation that she'd kept brief because brief seemed kinder, and he had responded by giving an interview to a gossip site that described her as emotionally unavailable and more interested in her portfolio than in people. She had read the piece once, which was one time too many. The thing was, and this was the part that kept arriving at inconvenient moments, the thing was that emotionally unavailable wasn't entirely wrong. Not for the reasons Garrett meant, and not in the way he'd framed it with the bitterness of someone who'd been caught caring more than they intended. But there was something true in the neighborhood of the accusation, something Amelia had been sorting through with varying degrees of success. She was 30 years old, and she could count on one hand the number of people in her life who she was confident knew her as anything other than Sinclair Automotive and all its implications. Her circle was enormous, and her intimacy was minimal, and she had spent so long operating in a world where everyone wanted something from her that she'd started assuming it as a baseline condition of all human interaction. She was also, though she wouldn't have put it this way to anyone, lonely in the specific and terrible way that only people surrounded by constant attention can be, which was probably why she'd agreed to the blind date. She pulled up the message thread with her college friend Kara, who had orchestrated this thing with the same cheerful insistence that Amelia associated with people who had found functional happiness in their own lives and were subsequently compelled to spread it around like a communicable disease. Kara: he's genuinely good, Ames. Not your usual type. Which is kind of the point. Kara: his sister is in my book club. She's been talking about him for months. He just doesn't know how to take the step himself. Kara: please don't cancel. I'll have to hear about it forever. Amelia had agreed 2 weeks ago in a moment of what she would generously describe as optimistic clarity. Since then, the clarity had curdled somewhat into something resembling dread. She didn't have a clear reason. Just the accumulated weight of previous dinners in nice restaurants with men who spent the first 20 minutes subtly asking questions that were actually about her net worth, and the quiet erosion that came from performing interest in conversations that never quite landed anywhere real. She looked at the clouds out the window again. Ryan, Kara had said. His name is Ryan. No last name yet, no background, just he's genuinely good. Which, as credentials went, was either the most meaningful thing anyone could say or the least. Amelia's car was in the parking structure, a black Mercedes S-Class that her company leased for executive use and that she drove herself because she'd fired her driver 8 months ago after discovering he'd been selling her schedule to a financial blogger. She'd driven herself everywhere since, which she actually preferred. There was something clarifying about being behind the wheel of a car, about being responsible for your own direction. It was one of the few remaining activities in her life where the variable of other people's agendas was temporarily removed. She gathered her coat, told Marcus she'd be unreachable from 7 to 9, and went to get her car. Outside, the rain was starting. Not the gentle kind. Ryan left the house at 6:38. He told Emma he was going, and she had responded by looking up from her phone with an expression that contained a carefully managed amount of satisfaction, the kind that 14-year-olds deploy when they've gotten the outcome they wanted, but are too smart to gloat about it directly. "Don't wear the gray shirt," she'd said. "What's wrong with the gray shirt?" "Nothing's wrong with it. It's just what you always wear when you're trying not to seem like you're trying." That's weirdly specific. Wear the blue one, the darker blue, with the collar. He'd worn the blue one. His pickup was a 2004 Ford F-150, dark red, which had been new when he bought it and was now the automotive equivalent of a trusted old colleague. Not glamorous, occasionally unreliable in cold weather, but fundamentally solid and honest about its limitations. He drove it through downtown, heading north toward the Meridian Bistro district, watching the rain start to hit the windshield in the particular way that suggested the weather app's severe rating was going to turn out to be accurate. He wasn't thinking about the date exactly. He was thinking around it, the way you circle something that makes you anxious without landing on it directly. He was thinking about whether Dale's truck would be ready by Thursday, and whether the property management company's overdue notice was going to turn into something more serious, and whether Emma's soccer tournament next weekend had a conflict with a supplier delivery he'd already half committed to. Ordinary worries in the key of a life held together by routine and attention to logistics. The thing about the date, the specific anxiety at the center of it, was something Ryan didn't examine too directly, because examining it directly led to a place he wasn't always capable of handling gracefully. It was the simple problem of what to say when someone asked him about his life. His life was the garage and his daughter and Tuesday evenings with Dale's truck and a corkboard photo of a woman who'd been gone 4 years. Not a tragic life. He'd fought against the word tragic every time it tried to attach itself to his situation. A small life. A deliberately small life that he'd constructed around the necessity of stability, around Emma needing one parent who showed up reliably and kept the ground solid, and somewhere in the process of doing that, he'd stopped noticing that the smallness had become something he didn't know how to step outside of. He turned onto Route 9, heading north. The rain was getting serious. His wipers worked overtime, and even at their fastest setting, they were losing ground against the downpour. The highway lamps threw orange light across sheets of water that came sideways in gusts. Ryan leaned slightly forward, the way experienced drivers do in bad visibility. Not because it helped exactly, but because it felt like doing something. He was about 4 miles north of the downtown interchange when he saw her. A car pulled onto the shoulder, a black Mercedes, expensive looking even in the dark and the rain, with the hood lifted and a thin curl of steam rising from the engine that the rain couldn't quite extinguish. The emergency hazards were blinking, and standing next to the driver's door, with one hand shielding her face from the rain and a phone held up in the other, was a woman in a cream-colored coat that was losing its battle with the weather at a significant rate. 3 cars passed without slowing. Ryan watched them go. He hit his indicator and pulled over. Meanwhile, on the same highway 15 minutes earlier, things had been fine. Amelia had been driving north on Route 9 in moderate rain, with the climate control running warm, and a Spotify playlist she'd put together 3 months ago and never quite finished. Early Norah Jones dissolving into something more recent and indistinct, the kind of music she chose when she didn't want to make choices. She'd been running through a mental list of exits, not literally, just the conversational kind. The phrases she'd use if the evening went the way evenings usually went. "I have an early meeting. The board call runs long on Fridays. I'll have Marcus confirm the follow-up." Polite, professional, final. Then the temperature gauge moved. Amelia watched it tick upward with the confused alertness of someone observing a problem in a language they don't quite speak. She understood cars conceptually. She ran an automotive company. But the specific mechanics of what happened under the hood when a gauge moved in the wrong direction was knowledge she had genuinely never needed to acquire personally. The gauge moved again. The check engine light came on, amber and insistent. Then the steam started. It came from beneath the hood in a thin white ribbon that became something more alarming within 30 seconds. Amelia pulled onto the shoulder with the careful precision of someone trying very hard not to make a bad situation worse, turned on her hazards, and sat for a moment trying to decide on a plan. The plan, such as it was, involved calling roadside assistance. She dialed the number. The automated system thanked her for her patience and estimated a 45 to 60-minute wait. The rain outside had graduated from serious to hostile. Her phone was at 17% battery. The restaurant was 4 miles north, and her coat was not the kind of coat that had been designed with weather functionality in mind. She got out of the car. This was, in retrospect, not the best decision. The rain hit her like a personal grievance, immediately soaking through the shoulders of the cream coat and running down the back of her neck in a way that was deeply unpleasant. She stood next to the driver's door and held her phone up and watched 3 separate pairs of headlights approach and continue past without any indication of stopping. The 4th set of headlights slowed. An old pickup truck, dark red or possibly dark brown in this light, pulled onto the shoulder behind her with the practiced ease of someone who'd pulled over on highways before. The headlights cut through the rain. The door opened. The man who got out was tall, maybe 6 feet even, wearing a dark jacket, and she would notice this later, when she had time to notice anything. Dark blue jeans and a collared shirt that the rain immediately started working on. He wasn't moving fast. He wasn't performing urgency. He just walked toward her with the unhurried directness of someone who'd already assessed the situation and decided what needed to happen. "You okay?" he said. His voice was level, normal, not the slightly heightened register people used when they were trying to impress someone. "The engine," she started. Something happened with the engine. He looked at the hood without looking at her. "Mind if I take a look?" "Please," she said, and realized she meant it with a sincerity that surprised her. He walked to the front of the car, found the hood release after a brief search. The Mercedes had a non-obvious latch placement, which he located without asking her where it was, and lifted it. Steam rolled out. He turned his face slightly, waited for it to dissipate, then leaned in and looked. "Radiator overflow," he said. "Probably a cracked hose or the cap failed. Not catastrophic, but you're not going anywhere on this without coolant." He straightened up and looked at her properly for the first time, and Amelia realized 2 things simultaneously. He genuinely did not recognize her, and she was genuinely grateful for that. "I have roadside assistance on the way," she said. 45 minutes. In this storm, it'll be longer. He said it without pessimism, just fact. "You got anything to hold water temporarily?" "Sometimes there's a..." He moved to the trunk area, looked back at her. "Pop the trunk?" "Oh, yes." She hit the remote. The trunk lifted. He went around and found the emergency kit she hadn't touched in 2 years. There was a small bottle of distilled water in it, emergency use, standard dealership include. He held it up. "This'll get you a few miles if the hose is still intact." He paused. "Where are you headed?" "Meridian Bistro," she said. "On Hargrove." "Yeah." He glanced up the highway up. "About 4 miles." "I know." She pushed wet hair out of her face. "I was going to be already late." He was already moving back to the engine. She watched him work. He did this with the practiced economy of someone for whom this kind of problem was ordinary, not special. He didn't narrate what he was doing or explain it in the slightly condescending way that people sometimes tried to explain mechanical things to women who clearly didn't already know. He just worked, hands moving through the steam, checking things she couldn't name. "Hose clamp came loose," he said. "The hose itself is okay. Hold on." He went back to his truck. She could see him digging through something behind the seat, a toolbox or a bag, and came back with a small wrench and what appeared to be a replacement clamp. "You just carry those?" she said. "Habit." He crouched down inside the engine compartment in a way that suggested he was completely indifferent to the rain. 14 years of driving this truck, you start keeping certain things on hand. She stood under the lifted hood as much as possible, which helped approximately nothing, and watched him work. The highway traffic passed in waves, headlights, spray, the white noise of tires on wet asphalt. In her coat pocket, her phone battery ticked from 17 to 16. "What's the truck?" she asked, because she was Amelia Sinclair, and even soaking wet on the shoulder of a highway, she defaulted to knowing things about vehicles. F-150, 2004. "Still running well." He glanced up briefly from the engine. "Mostly. Has opinions about cold weather." He turned back to what he was doing. "You know trucks?" "Somewhat." She paused. The rain drummed on the car roof around them. "I work in automotive." "Sales?" "More or less." She let it sit there. He didn't press. All right. He straightened, checked the hose connection, used his hand to verify something she couldn't see the significance of. Try starting it. Slowly. Don't rev it. Just turn the key and let it idle. She got in the car, dripping on the leather seat, and turned the key. The engine caught. No warning lights. The temperature gauge stayed where it was supposed to. She got back out. The rain hit her again like it was making a point. Thank you, she said. Seriously, what do I... She reached for her purse. He held up one hand. Don't worry about it. I'd like to... It's a hose clamp, he said. Not a thing. She looked at him. In the orange highway light and the rain, he was wet through and grease-marked on his right hand and apparently completely unconcerned about either of these facts. He was probably mid-30s. He had the kind of face that wasn't particularly memorable in pieces, but worked in a way that landed differently than expected. Honest, she thought, which was a strange thing to read in someone's face, but was the word that arrived. You were going somewhere, she said. I've made you late. I was actually... He stopped. He looked up the highway. A complicated expression crossed his face that he smoothed out quickly. I was going to Meridian Bistro too, actually. Amelia blinked the rain out of her eyes. The restaurant on Hargrove. Yeah. He said it like he was checking a fact. You said that's where you're headed. It is. They stood on the shoulder of Route 9 in the rain, 40 feet of wet highway between them, and the question neither of them was quite asking yet. You're late for a dinner? She said. A dinner. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah. He looked at her. Are you... He stopped. Amelia felt something strange happen in her chest. A small shift, like a misaligned thing finding its correct position. A blind date? She said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh and didn't quite get there. That's genuinely... Under the name Carter? She said. The laugh arrived this time. Not polished. Not the performance of a laugh. Something real and slightly confused and caught off guard. Under the name Sinclair, she said. He stopped laughing and looked at her. The rain continued its absolute indifference to the moment. You're... He pointed at her soaked coat and rain-flattened hair and general condition of someone who had been standing on a highway shoulder for 20 minutes. You're Sinclair. I'm Sinclair, she confirmed. He blinked. I'm Carter. Ryan Carter. I'm Amelia. She paused. Amelia Sinclair. He stared at her for one full second. Your radiator, he said. Yes. Another second of silence, punctuated by a passing semi that threw a wave of highway spray across both of them. Of all the... He started. I know, she said. 4 miles. I know. And then, not because either of them were performing it or because the moment demanded it, but because the alternative was standing in the rain being solemn about an objectively absurd situation, they both started laughing at approximately the same time. The genuine, uncontrolled kind, standing in a downpour on the shoulder of Route 9 with grease on his hand and mascara on her cheek, and the Meridian Bistro 4 miles north waiting for both of them. Amelia couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. She was aware of this, distantly, even in the middle of it. Not as a sad thought, just as an observation. Something noted. We should... He gestured toward the cars. You should get back in your car before it gets cold again. Right. She moved toward the door, paused. Thank you. Actually, not just for the... She waved at the engine. He shook his head. Don't thank me for the hose clamp. I wasn't. She looked at him. For stopping. He met her eyes in the rain, and something passed between them that was too early and too new to be named, and both of them were sensible enough not to try. I'll see you in 4 miles, he said. Drive carefully, she said. She got in her car. He walked back to his truck. The hazards on the Mercedes went dark. Both vehicles pulled back onto the highway, heading north in the rain. The hostess at Meridian Bistro was a polished young woman named Brianna, who had seen enough in 3 years of upscale restaurant service to maintain composure in virtually any circumstance. She maintained composure when Ryan came through the door at 7:43 p.m., 43 minutes late, slightly damp, despite his best efforts with the paper towels in the men's room, and smelling faintly and apologetically of motor oil. Carter, he said. Or Sinclair. Either one. 1 moment, sir. Brianna consulted the reservation system. The other party hasn't arrived yet. Would you like to wait at the bar? Or I'll wait at the table, if that's okay. She led him through the restaurant. It was a Thursday evening, fairly full, the warm amber light and low music doing what expensive restaurants do, making the air feel like it cost something, which in this case it did. Ryan was aware, in the specific way that people who don't often frequent places like this are aware, that he was slightly wrong for the room. Not embarrassingly wrong, just slightly. The collar of the blue shirt was doing its job, but his hands were not the hands of a man who spent his evenings in restaurants like this, and certain things couldn't be entirely scrubbed away at a highway rest stop sink. He sat down, ordered water, looked at the menu without reading it. He was thinking about what had just happened on the highway. He was trying to think about it practically. She was, whoever she was, Sinclair, she'd said, and the name was doing something in the back of his mind, pulling at something familiar. Sinclair Automotive. He knew the name. He knew it in the industry way that every independent garage owner in a 7-state radius knew it, as the name of the company that had been buying up dealership networks and pushing into fleet management and was either going to change the way automotive service worked in this region or was going to fail spectacularly trying. He'd followed the acquisition news the way he followed all industry news, with the distant attention of someone watching something happen in a country adjacent to his own. He hadn't put it together until just now because a soaking wet woman on the side of a highway in a cream coat did not, in his immediate experience, read as the president of a billion-dollar corporation. She had told him she was in automotive. More or less, she'd said, in the tone of someone being accurate while being deliberately incomplete. He hadn't pressed because it hadn't seemed like his business. He'd been there to fix the car. The door opened. Amelia came in. She had stopped somewhere. A bathroom, probably, or maybe she kept things in her car, and had managed to undestroy some portion of what the rain had done to her. Her hair was still damp but gathered back now. Her coat was off, over her arm, the cream color uneven and still wet in places but no longer fully catastrophic. She was wearing a dark blouse underneath. She saw him before the hostess reached her. Their eyes met across the restaurant. And Ryan watched something happen on her face that he wouldn't have known how to describe if asked. A small, private release. Like someone who'd been bracing for a disappointment that didn't arrive. She crossed the room toward him, and he stood, and for a moment they just looked at each other in the dry, warm, amber-lit space of the restaurant, with all the highway rain behind them, and the absurdity of the situation pressed down into something quieter. And Ryan thought, okay, all right, what do we do with this? You made it, she said. Had a good mechanic on the route, he said. She smiled and sat down, and the evening began. They ordered. They talked. Not the way people talk on first dates, with the carefully distributed packets of information designed to present a favorable but defensible version of themselves. It didn't work that way. Couldn't, really, after 40 minutes on a highway in the dark. They'd already seen each other at suboptimal. The usual performance was off the table, which turned out to be the best possible setup for an actual conversation. Ryan told her about the garage. Not apologetically, just plainly. Carter Automotive Repair. 8 years in the same building on Merchant Street. 3 lifts, 1 unreliable fluorescent, a customer base built on word of mouth and the kind of reliability that Ryan had decided was the only non-negotiable in his professional life. You did it yourself? Amelia asked. Started it. Used my dad's name on the sign, he said. He was a mechanic. Never had his own place. I figured... He picked up his water glass, set it back down. I figured the name should matter eventually. Amelia was quiet for a moment. What happened to him? Passed away, before I opened. Saw the building, but didn't see the sign. I'm sorry. It's... He exhaled. It's okay. The sign is good. He would have liked it. A pause. Probably would have had notes about the parking. She laughed, and this time it was quieter, more considered, warmer. My father has notes about everything, she said. He's still here. She turned her water glass slowly. Retired, after he handed me the company. She said it with the careful neutrality of someone who has constructed a neutral way of saying something complicated. We have a functional relationship. He believes I'm capable and also slightly insane. Those two things coexist in him. But he handed it over. He did. She glanced at the table. I don't think either of us knew exactly what that meant at the time. Ryan ate some of his food, a roasted chicken dish he'd chosen somewhat randomly, which turned out to be legitimately good in a way that surprised him. How old were you? 27. She said it like she was still slightly surprised by the number herself. He'd been planning it for years, apparently, had benchmarks I didn't know about. I hit them and he called me into his office one afternoon and said, "The company is yours," and then he retired to Scottsdale 3 weeks later. Just like that. Just like that. Ryan chose his words. That's a lot to carry. It is. Amelia looked at him. Nobody tells you that, though. Everyone says congratulations and writes the profile pieces, and you're on 3 magazine covers and you're standing there thinking, do I tell someone that I don't actually know if I can do this? She stopped. Sorry, don't apologize. He said it plainly. No flourish. She looked at him again. That same look from the highway, slightly puzzled, slightly recalibrating. Like he kept responding in ways that required a small adjustment. You don't know who I am, she said. Not an accusation, more like checking the temperature of a fact. I know you run Sinclair Automotive, he said. I figured that out in the 45 minutes I was sitting here. Did that change anything? He thought about it honestly. Made me understand why you said more or less when I asked if you were in sales. She laughed once, short and real. I'm not going to pretend the gap isn't real, Ryan said. My garage made about $160,000 last year before expenses. I live in a rented house. That's the math. He kept his voice even. But you asked if it changed anything, and the honest answer is no. It doesn't change the fact that you were stuck on a highway and you handled it without making it anyone else's problem, which is... He turned his fork in his fingers. That's just character. That's not affected by the number in your account. Amelia Sinclair, who could count on one hand the number of times in the past 3 years someone had said something to her that she had not in some way been able to predict, did not say anything for a long moment. I was trying not to cry, she said finally. On the highway? When the 3rd car passed, Yes, I was trying very hard not to do that. She said it without self-pity, just the fact of it placed on the table. I'm not good at being helpless. Nobody is. I'm specifically bad at it. Noted, he said. She smiled into her plate. They talked for another 2 hours. Not continuously smooth. There were pauses, some awkward, some not. Ryan mentioned Emma, who was a subject he didn't bring up casually with people, and found that once he started, he didn't want to stop. Not the statistics of it, the difficulty of it, but Emma herself, who'd chosen to watch documentaries about ocean ecosystems for fun at age 12 and had a habit of leaving her soccer cleats in the kitchen doorway where Ryan would step on them, and who had looked him in the eye last night and told him he was allowed to be more than fine. She sounds extraordinary, Amelia said. She's remarkable, Ryan said. I take approximately 0 credit for that. She came out this way. That's not... She did, he said. Some of it's her, and some of it was Diane. He said the name with the practiced ease of someone who taught themselves to say it out loud. My wife. She died 4 years ago. Amelia's expression changed, not to pity, which Ryan was calibrated to deflect, but to something more considered, like she was adding something to an equation. I'm sorry, she said, and I mean that without the reflexive, I know. How are you with it? You don't have to. Most days it's manageable, he said. Some days it's worse than that, but Emma... He stopped. Emma is a reason to get things right. She's a good reason. The restaurant had thinned out around them. Brianna, the hostess, had stopped checking on their table with pointed frequency approximately 45 minutes ago and seemed to have accepted that this particular two-top was not in a hurry. Ryan looked at the woman across the table from him. This person he'd found soaking wet on a highway 4 hours ago, who had turned out to be simultaneously more complicated and more straightforward than anyone he could have predicted walking into this building. She was not what he'd expected. He hadn't known what to expect, which had turned out to be useful. She was tired in a way that was only visible now, in the second hour, when the front-facing version of herself had relaxed into something that had less architecture to it. She held her wine glass by the stem and looked at the middle distance sometimes while he talked, actually listening instead of waiting to respond, which was rarer than it should have been. You're not what... he started, and then stopped. What? I was going to say you're not what I expected, but that's not quite right because I didn't know what to expect, so… He turned his fork again, the habit of it. I don't know what I'm saying. Say it anyway, she said. I'm glad I stopped, he said. Amelia held her wine glass and looked at him, and outside the restaurant the rain continued its long opinion of everything. And in the amber light of the Meridian Bistro on a Thursday night in late October, something that had not existed 2 hours ago came carefully and tentatively into being. Not fully formed, not finished, not requiring a name yet, just present. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I almost canceled. She set the wine glass down. Today. I came very close to calling Kara and canceling and going back to my apartment and ordering sushi and watching something forgettable. She looked at him. I've been canceling things like this for about 2 years, because every time I go, it's… She pressed her lips together. It's never real. It's always about something else. The company, the name, what I can do for someone's career or portfolio. And I had made a decision, I think somewhere in the past year, that real was probably not available to me, that the cost of being what I am was that. She held his gaze. I'm telling you this because you were honest with me, and I think you deserve the same thing back. Ryan was quiet for a moment. I almost drove home, he said. Not even almost. I sat in my car outside this restaurant for about 4 minutes before I came in. Sitting there in the parking lot thinking, he exhaled. Thinking I was too out of practice for this. That my life had too many rough edges and not enough… He searched for the word. Possibility. For something like this to matter. Rough edges aren't the problem, she said. No? No. She shook her head, and something was decided in her expression. Not the executive sharpness she wore professionally, but something quieter and more personal. I spend my entire life surrounded by things that have had all their edges removed. It is not as comfortable as it sounds. Outside, the rain had softened. Ryan looked down this table at the woman who'd been stranded in the storm, and he thought, not with the language his brain usually moved in, not the language of invoices and logistics and careful small life management, he thought, okay, maybe, just that. Maybe. Outside the restaurant, the pavement was wet and reflected the streetlights in long orange streaks. They stood under the awning while Amelia's car was brought around by the valet. The parking lot was quiet. The rain had settled into something light and barely there, the kind that isn't quite drizzle but has given up its earlier ambitions. 4 miles, Ryan said, looking up the street. What? We were 4 miles apart the whole time, he said. That's a strange thing. Everything about tonight is a strange thing. The Mercedes came around. The valet handed Amelia the key. She'd replaced the coolant properly at a station on the way back, she'd told him. The hose was holding. The car looked like nothing had happened to it. Cars were good at that. So, she said. She turned to face him, hand on the car door. Kara is going to want a full debriefing. My sister, too. What are you going to tell her? Ryan thought about it. That it wasn't terrible. Amelia's mouth moved. That's your summary? High praise, he said. You don't know my sister. She laughed, the real kind. I'd like to see you again, she said. Not coy about it, not strategic, just direct, in the way of someone who had learned that honesty was faster and less exhausting than the alternative. Ryan nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I think I'd like that too. She looked at him for a long moment in the light rain, in the street light, in the quiet end of a night that had started badly and arrived somewhere better. Only if your car promises not to explode next time, he said. I make no promises on behalf of the car. She got in. Good night, Ryan. Good night, Amelia. The Mercedes pulled out of the lot and moved north up the street, its taillights small and red in the damp dark. Ryan stood under the awning for a moment longer. Then he walked to his truck, got in, and sat there for a moment with the keys in his hand and the rain on the roof and the particular feeling of someone who had walked into a building expecting one kind of evening and was walking out of it holding something else. Smaller than hope, maybe, but in the same neighborhood. Something careful and new and not fully formed yet. He started the truck. On Calloway Street, Emma was probably still awake. He drove home through the wet, quiet city, and the night held everything it held, and nothing was resolved, and nothing needed to be yet. Emma was still awake. Ryan knew she would be before he even turned onto Calloway Street. The light in her bedroom window was on. The specific warm yellow of her desk lamp, not the overhead, which meant she was reading or pretending to read while actually waiting for the sound of the truck in the driveway. He'd learned to read the light patterns of this house, the way sailors read weather. Different lights meant different things. Different silences meant different things. 4 years of being the only adult in a two-person household had made him fluent in a language that had no name. He came through the back door at 10:47, later than he'd expected to be. The kitchen was clean. Emma had washed the pasta dishes, which she did maybe 40% of the time, which meant tonight she had been managing something with the activity of cleaning. Mild anxiety, probably. The low-grade kind she got when she cared about something and had to wait to find out how it went. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door. Footsteps on the stairs. Not fast, measured, casual, the way teenagers tried to appear when they were the opposite of casual. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in her socks and an oversized soccer sweatshirt, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, holding her phone in a way that suggested she'd just put it face down in a hurry. "You're late," she said. "I'm aware." "How late were you to the actual restaurant?" 43 minutes. She leaned against the doorframe and studied him with the particular attention she applied to things that mattered. "You don't look terrible," she said finally. "That's the bar." "For this specific situation, yes." She uncrossed her arms. "Well?" Ryan opened the refrigerator, found the water pitcher, poured a glass. Not because he was thirsty, just to have something to do with his hands while he figured out what version of tonight he was going to tell his 14-year-old daughter. "It was interesting," he said. "Interesting." She pulled out a kitchen chair and sat on it sideways, legs dangling over the armrest in the boneless way of people who hadn't yet hit 30 and didn't realize that would eventually stop being comfortable. That's not a nothing word. That's a word you use when you don't want to say the real word. When did you get this perceptive? I've always been this perceptive. You're only now noticing because you're tired. Ryan drank his water. He thought about the restaurant, the highway, the rain. Amelia's face in the amber light when she said, "I've been canceling things like this for about 2 years. She's complicated," he said. "People are complicated, Dad." "She's specifically complicated, in ways I wasn't expecting." He set down the glass. "Her car broke down on Route 9 on the way there. I stopped to help." Emma went still. "You stopped to help the woman you were going on a date with." "I didn't know she was the woman I was going on a date with. I stopped because her car broke down." A pause. "And then you found out," Emma said. "At the restaurant, yeah." Emma sat up slowly from her sideways position. The boneless teenager dissolved into something more upright and attentive. That's actually a good story." "I'm aware." "Was she nice?" Ryan turned the water glass in his hands. Nice was the wrong word for Amelia Sinclair. Nice was a word that fit things that were pleasant and uncomplicated and didn't require much from you. "She was real," he said, "which is different." Emma looked at him for a long moment. She had her mother's eyes, that specific shade of dark brown that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, that made you feel watched in a way that was not unkind. "Are you going to see her again?" She asked if she could. "What did you say?" "I said yes." Emma nodded once, the way she nodded when she was processing something she wanted to respond to carefully. She got off the chair, crossed the kitchen, and, in the way she did sometimes that still caught him off guard, the way that reminded him that she was still 14 underneath all the perception, she put her head briefly against his shoulder. Not a full hug, just that. Then she straightened and picked up her phone from the counter. "Don't overthink it," she said, and went back upstairs. Ryan stood in the kitchen for a moment after she left. He drank the rest of his water. He turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs and on the way past the door to Emma's room, where the lamp was still on, and he could hear the faint sound of something on her laptop. One of those ocean documentaries she'd been working through, the narrator's voice low and measured, talking about something that lived in deep water. He went to bed. He did not sleep immediately, which was not unusual. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and let the night settle into its quiet. And he thought about a woman in a cream coat standing in the rain, and the particular quality of her laugh when the situation finally struck both of them as absurd, and the way she'd looked at him when he said, "I'm glad I stopped," not with relief, not with performance, but with something careful and real and slightly guarded, like someone who wanted to believe something and had not quite decided yet whether it was safe to. "Rough edges aren't the problem," she'd said. He fell asleep sometime around midnight, which was early for him. On Callaway Street, the rain had stopped, and the gutters ran quietly, and the night was the ordinary kind that contained nothing extraordinary unless you had recently been standing on a highway in a storm and found out that extraordinary sometimes drove a 10-year-old Mercedes with a faulty hose clamp. He fell asleep. He did not dream of anything he remembered. The next morning, he was at the garage by 7:15, which was normal. Dale's truck was done, which was satisfying. The fluorescent in Bay 3 flickered twice and then, inexplicably, held steady for the entire morning, which felt like a minor reprieve from a universe that had been mildly cooperative lately. His phone buzzed at 10:40, a number he didn't have saved. "This is Amelia. I wanted to thank you again for last night. And not just for the hose clamp, though also for the hose clamp. I have a meeting in your area next Thursday. If you're free for lunch, I'd like that." Ryan read the message twice. Then he set the phone face down on the toolbox and went back under the Dodge Caravan he'd been working on for the past hour. He stayed under there for about 4 minutes, torquing a bolt that didn't need any more torquing, before he picked the phone back up. "I'm usually free between noon and 1. There's a diner on Merchant that's nothing to look at, but the food is honest. If that works for you?" 3 minutes passed. "That works perfectly. See you Thursday." He saved the number under her name, put the phone back on the toolbox, slid back under the Caravan. The fluorescent light in Bay 3 flickered once and went back to holding steady. He worked through the morning and did not let himself think about Thursday more than twice, which was a lie, but a sustainable one. Sarah called at noon. He let it go to voicemail. She left one that ran 45 seconds and contained, in order, a demand for information, a rhetorical question about why he couldn't just answer the phone, a statement that Emma had already texted her something, another demand for information, and the closing declaration that she would literally drive to the garage if he didn't respond by 2 p.m. He texted back, "It went well. Don't drive to the garage." Her response was a string of 5 emojis that he chose not to interpret individually. He ate his lunch, a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks over that he'd been ordering the same way for 8 years, turkey and provolone, no tomato, sitting in the small office with Dale's invoice and the supplier catalog and the corkboard on the wall. He looked at Diane's photo for a moment, which he did sometimes without planning to, the same way you look at something so familiar it stops registering and then suddenly registers again. He thought about what he'd said at the restaurant. Some days it's worse than that. And the way Amelia had not rushed past it or filled the space with something consoling and empty. She'd just let it be true. There was a kind of intelligence in that, a social intelligence maybe, or something more personal, the intelligence of someone who knew what it felt like to carry a weight that other people couldn't quite see, and had learned that the most useful thing you could do for someone in that position was not try to lift it for them. He finished his sandwich. He went back to work. Thursday arrived with the specific pressure of something you've been pretending not to anticipate. The morning was busy, a brake job, an oil change, a transmission question from a woman named Mrs. Kellerman who turned out to need a new transmission, a conversation he delivered carefully and which she received with the resigned dignity of someone who had suspected as much but hoped she was wrong. By 11:30, Ryan had washed his hands twice and changed his shirt in the small back bathroom, which was a thing he was aware of doing and chose not to assign too much significance to. Amelia texted at 11:55. "Heading over now." The meeting ran long. "Take your time," he texted back, which was accurate. The diner was 30 seconds from the garage and he had nowhere to be. She arrived at 12:17 in the Mercedes, which had clearly been serviced since Thursday and showed no signs of its highway drama. She got out of the car in a gray blazer and dark trousers, the version of herself that existed in boardrooms and meetings, and walked toward the diner with the practiced pace of someone who crossed distances purposefully. Ryan was already at the door. "The meeting," she said as a greeting. "That bad?" "It was fine. Long." She looked at the diner, the faded sign, the slightly uneven window lettering, The lunch special written on a chalkboard that had been the same chalkboard for as long as Ryan could remember. "This is honest," she said, with something that wasn't quite amusement but was related to it. "I told you." They went in. Patty, who had been working the noon shift at this diner for approximately as long as the chalkboard had existed, seated them in the corner booth without ceremony and brought coffee without being asked because Ryan had been coming here long enough that his preferences were a given. She set a second cup in front of Amelia and said, "Han," in the inclusive way that suggested Amelia was being temporarily absorbed into the category of regular, and left them with laminated menus that both of them studied briefly, and mostly for something to do. "You come here a lot," Amelia observed. "A few times a week." He set down the menu. "The cook's name is Gene. He's been making the same soup since 2008. It's good soup." "What kind?" "Depends on the day." He looked at her. "You don't eat in places like this much." "I eat in places like this specifically never," she said without apology, which is probably a gap I've been ignoring. "It's not a moral failing." "Probably not." She looked at the laminated menu with genuine attention, like she was reading a document with information she intended to retain. "What's the honest food?" "The Reuben is the honest food," he said. "The club sandwich is fine. The soup today is probably vegetable beef." She ordered the Reuben. Ryan ordered the soup and a grilled cheese, which was what he usually ordered, which Patty had already written down without asking. The diner filled up around them. The noon crowd, working people mostly, the table of contractors near the window who came in every Thursday, the woman from the insurance office down the street who ate alone and read on her phone, the ambient noise of a place that was functional and unpretentious and completely indifferent to the question of whether you belong there. Amelia unwrapped her silverware from the paper napkin and set everything in its correct position on the table, which was a habit she had and which she seemed to do unconsciously, and then looked up and caught him watching. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be. It's the automotive empire instinct. Everything in order." "That's a very kind interpretation." She folded her hands on the table. "I wanted to ask you something." "Okay." "The garage. You said last week it's been 8 years. 8 years in that building." "I was at a shop on Fletcher before that for 4 years. Learned everything I know about keeping a business alive from a man named Dominic, who should have retired in 2010 and finally did in 2014 when his back gave out on him." "What's the status of it?" "The business." She said it directly, without the padding people sometimes added to make financial questions sound less financial. He appreciated that. "Functional," he said. "Some months better than others. I've been losing 2 of my corporate fleet accounts. They went to a larger service center that can turn around more volume, so the numbers are—" He paused, chose honesty over pride. "They're tighter than I'd like them to be. This year has been harder than last year." Amelia was quiet, listening. "I'm not looking for a rescue," he said, which came out more direct than he'd intended, but was true. Something shifted in her expression. Not offense, but recognition. "I know," she said. "I wasn't offering one. I was asking because I'm curious about how you built it and what it does and what it needs, because those things tell me something about a person." She met his eyes. "I ask everyone I'm interested in about their work. It's a habit." "Everyone you're interested in," he repeated, "in any context." A brief pause that they both noticed. Business, professional, personal. Their food arrived. Patty set it down and refilled the coffee and disappeared with the efficiency of someone who had learned that certain tables needed space and certain tables needed attention, and the skill was telling the difference. Amelia picked up the Reuben with both hands, which Ryan noted as a small, unrehearsed thing. No attempt to cut it into smaller, manageable pieces, no cautious approach. Just the sandwich. She took a bite and chewed and said nothing for a moment. "Good?" he asked. "Genuinely good," she said, with the mild surprise of someone whose expectations have been exceeded in a direction they didn't predict. "Gene's been making it the same way since 2008 also," Ryan said. They ate. They talked. More easily than Thursday, the restaurant first date formality having dissolved into something that felt more like continuation. She told him about the company, not the headline version, but the underneath version, the part about managing 160 employees whose livelihoods were connected to decisions she made in a glass conference room, the weight of that, the specific insomnia of that. She told him about the acquisition attempt 2 years ago. A larger competitor who had made a move that should have worked and didn't, because Amelia had seen it coming 3 months earlier than anyone expected and had outmaneuvered it in ways that her own board hadn't fully understood until after the fact. Your board didn't understand what you were doing? Ryan asked. Not until it was done. She drank her coffee. Some of them still aren't entirely sure they trust my judgment. I've been right often enough that they can't argue with outcomes. But being right isn't the same as being trusted. She set the mug down. There's a version of me they want. Collaborative, consensus building, patient. I'm not that version, most of the time. I move faster than that, and I don't always explain myself while I'm moving. Does that bother you, that they don't trust the process? It used to. She thought about it. Now I just try to make sure the outcomes are clear enough that the process doesn't matter. Ryan turned his soup spoon. That sounds lonely. She looked at him. I don't mean it as a criticism, he said. I mean it as being the fastest person in a room you didn't design and can't leave. That's lonely in a specific way. Amelia held his gaze. Yeah, she said, just that. They sat for a moment in the unremarkable interior of the diner on Merchant Street, with Jean's soup and the Thursday contractors and the woman from the insurance office, and something passed between them that was different from Thursday. Less surprised by itself, more settled. They were two people who had established something and were now in the process of figuring out what it was. Emma, she said, tell me something about her that isn't the summary version. He thought about it. She convinced me last spring to watch a 6-part documentary about deep-sea creatures. I had no interest. She narrated the entire thing, added her own commentary, argued with the narrator at one point about bioluminescence. He shook his head. I came out of it actually knowing things about anglerfish that I did not need to know, and she looked at me afterward like she'd given me a gift, which she had. He looked at his soup. She's like that. She'll hand you her enthusiasms and you take them, because it's Emma. Amelia smiled. Not the professional smile, the other one, which was quieter and less constructed and lived closer to her eyes. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She is. He paused. She knows about you. Not much. I told her the car on the highway story. She said it was a good story. High praise from a 14-year-old. Very high. She doesn't give that out freely. Amelia looked at him. Are you worried? About bringing someone new, even in concept, into that? Yes, he said simply. But the worry is based on the right instinct, I think. I'm not worried about Emma. I'm worried about getting it wrong for Emma. There's a difference. He folded his napkin on the table. She's had 4 years of things being a certain way, and she's adjusted to that way. Changing it requires being sure you're not changing it for nothing. And you're not sure yet. I'm not sure yet. That's honest, she said. I try to be. She nodded once, receiving it. They split the check. Amelia reached for it first, and Ryan caught the edge of it at the same time, and they had a 2-second standoff that resolved itself when Ryan said, I invited you, with a tone that was not aggressive but was not movable. And Amelia considered this for a moment and let go of the check. Outside, the afternoon was gray but not threatening, the kind of mid-autumn gray that was ambient rather than dramatic. Her car was parked 3 spots from his truck. I want to be clear about something, she said. They were standing on the sidewalk, not quite at the point of separating to their cars. I'm aware of the gap, the financial one, the everything else one. I'm aware that I move in a world that doesn't intersect with your world much, and I'm not going to pretend that's simple. I'm not asking you to. I know. She put her hands in the pockets of her blazer. I just want to say it out loud because I've watched the version of this where both people ignore the obvious thing until it's too late to address it, and I don't want that. She looked at him directly. So, I'm aware. It's real. And I'd like to see you anyway. Ryan looked at her on the sidewalk outside the diner on Merchant Street with the gray sky above and the contractor's truck still parked at the curb and Jean probably still in the kitchen making the same thing he'd been making since 2008. Next week, he said. Emma has a soccer tournament Saturday. It's nothing fancy. It's in Hendricks Park, under lights if it runs late. Thermos of bad coffee from the corner gas station. If you want to see something real about my life, that's something real about my life. A pause. I'd like that, she said. No pressure if it conflicts with something. It doesn't. She said it quickly enough that he knew she hadn't checked, which meant she was going to make it not conflict. "I'll be there." She got in the Mercedes. He got in the truck. She pulled out first and turned right. He turned left. They went in different directions down the same street, and the gray afternoon held them both. He was back at the garage by 1:15. Dale came in at 2 with a question about his truck that was not really a question about his truck, and they talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, which was the actual point. Ryan ordered a new fan belt for a Honda that was coming in Friday. The fluorescent in Bay 3 held. He did not text Amelia again that day, and she did not text him, and the silence was the comfortable kind rather than the anxious kind, which was itself a small piece of information about what this was. Saturday came. Hendricks Park in November was not anyone's idea of pleasant. The sports complex on the south side had 4 adjacent fields, decent lighting for evening games, bleachers that were functional rather than comfortable, and a wind that came off the adjacent reservoir and found creative paths through any combination of layers you chose to wear. Emma's team, the Westside Falcons, U15 division, was playing a team from Glenbrook in the second bracket of a fall tournament that had been organized by a parent committee of impressive logistical thoroughness, which Ryan knew because he was on the parent committee. He arrived at 9:30 in the morning with a stadium chair he'd owned for 6 years and a thermos of coffee from the gas station on Maple, which was exactly as advertised, and which he'd been drinking for 3 tournament seasons because at a certain point, familiarity became its own comfort. Emma's first game was at 10. She played midfielder, not the most glamorous position, she had informed him once, because midfielders did most of the work and got credit for approximately half of it, which she accepted as a structural condition of the role. She was good. Ryan was aware that he was a biased observer and discounted his own assessment accordingly. But the objective evidence, playing time, team reliance, the way the coach called her name, supported the conclusion. He watched the first half from the bleachers with the other parents. Lisa Tran, whose daughter played goalkeeper, sat beside him with her own thermos, and they talked about nothing more significant than the weather and the Glenbrook team's notably aggressive press, which was a conversation Ryan participated in with genuine attention because the aggressive press was actually an interesting tactical choice against Emma's team's preferred build-from-the-back approach. His phone buzzed at 10:40, midway through the first half. "I'm in the parking lot. Which field?" He looked up from the game and experienced a small, complicated feeling. He texted back, "Field 2, South Bleachers. I'm in the gray jacket." 2 minutes later, Amelia appeared at the end of the bleachers. She was dressed differently than he'd seen her before. Dark jeans, a dark green parka that was clearly well made but was actually designed for weather, a scarf. Not the boardroom, not even the blazer from Thursday. She looked like herself in a register he hadn't seen yet, and it landed differently than the Mercedes and blazer version without being less. She made her way along the bleachers, saw him, and came over. Lisa Tran glanced up with polite curiosity. "Hi," Amelia said, sitting down beside him. "Which one is Emma?" 11, he said. "Number 11. She found her on the field, Emma in motion, receiving a pass and turning with it in one movement, distributing quickly to the right wing. Amelia watched for a moment. "She's good," she said. "She's very good," Ryan said. Then, because honesty went in both directions, "I might be biased." "You're not. She just made that whole sequence look easy, and it wasn't." Lisa Tran introduced herself with the particular interest of a person who has noted something of significance, but is being diplomatic about it. Amelia responded to the introduction with no indication that she was anyone other than a person at a soccer game, which Ryan noticed and which he thought was not nothing. They watched the rest of the first half. Ryan provided occasional context, the tactical situation, the coach's philosophy, the ongoing subplot of Emma's team's complicated relationship with set pieces. Amelia asked questions that were specific rather than polite, the kind that demonstrated she was actually watching and processing rather than performing interest. At one point, Emma made a defensive interception that cut off a dangerous Glenbrook counter, and Amelia said quietly, "Oh, that was smart," in the tone of someone who had seen the problem before Emma solved it and was confirming her own read. Ryan looked at her. "You actually know soccer." "I funded a women's league development program 3 years ago," she said. "You pick things up." At halftime, Emma came off the field for water. She scanned the bleachers with the automatic radar of a teenager who always knows where her parent is, found Ryan, found the person sitting next to Ryan, and went very carefully still. Ryan gave her a small nod. Emma came over. She was sweaty and slightly out of breath, and her hair had escaped its ponytail in the way it always did by halftime. She looked at Amelia with the direct assessment of someone who was 14 and intelligent and was not going to pretend she wasn't doing exactly what she was doing. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Amelia said. "You play a smart midfield." Emma looked at her father briefly, back at Amelia. "Thanks." A pause. "The Glenbrook press is going to open up in the second half. Their high press burns a lot of energy." "I thought the same thing," Amelia said. Emma nodded once, again the processing nod. "I'm going to get more water," she said, and went back toward her team. Ryan watched her go. Emma glanced back once, over her shoulder, with an expression that was complicated and also 14 years old, and also something like cautious approval, if he was reading it right. "She's evaluating me," Amelia said, beside him. "She absolutely is." "Good," she said. "That's the right call." The second half played out more or less as Emma had predicted. The Glenbrook press broke down in the 63rd minute. Emma threaded a through ball that her striker converted. The Falcons won 2-0. Ryan watched his daughter play and felt the ordinary deep pride of it, the thing that had been constant in 4 years of everything else changing. He also watched, peripherally, how Amelia watched. Not the game. Her. The focused attention, unperformed. The way she leaned forward slightly when the play got interesting. The way she didn't check her phone during the second half, not once, which was a thing that registered because he knew what her phone was like. What it contained, what pulled on it, what it asked of her constantly. She'd left all of that somewhere else for 90 minutes on a cold Saturday in Hendricks Park under November light, and had just watched a 14-year-old play soccer. After the final whistle, with the parents shuffling down from the bleachers and Emma somewhere at the field side celebrating with her team, Ryan said, "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me to something real," she said. He'd said that at the diner. "If you want to see something real about my life, this is something real." He'd forgotten that she'd been listening. They walked down from the bleachers together toward the field, and the November wind came off the reservoir and Emma's voice rose somewhere in the middle of her celebrating teammates. Ryan could pick it out without searching, would always be able to pick it out in any crowd, which was one of those facts about parenthood that nobody warned you about and you only discovered once it was already completely true. Emma broke away from her team and came toward them, cleats in hand, hair entirely free of its ponytail now and damp from exertion. "We won," she said unnecessarily. "You won," Ryan confirmed. Emma looked at Amelia. Something had shifted in the assessment, still cautious, but moved a degree in a direction Ryan recognized as positive. "The press broke at 62, she said. 63, Amelia said. "I had 62. Their last high press sequence started at 61 and completed at 63. I was counting from completion." Emma stared at her for a moment. "Fair," she said. They walked toward the parking lot, the three of them, in the wind. Emma talked about the game, about a foul she thought should have been called in the first half, about the other bracket results she'd seen on the way off the field. Amelia listened and responded and was generally, Ryan was looking for the word, present. Actually present, in the way of someone who had chosen to be here rather than somewhere more comfortable or important. At the car, Emma said she was going back to grab her bag from the team tent and would be 5 minutes, and left them there by the truck. "She's going to give us a minute," Amelia said. "She is," Ryan agreed. "She's also actually going to get her bag." Both things. Amelia looked out over the park, the adjacent fields, the gray water of the reservoir visible beyond the tree line. "Ryan." He waited. "I want to say something, and I want to say it before this progresses further and it becomes harder to say." She turned to face him. Her expression was careful and direct in equal measure. "I haven't done this in a long time. Something real. And I'm aware that I come with—" She paused, measured the words. "A very full life that has very complicated edges and doesn't always make room for people." She looked at him. "I'm telling you because you've been honest with me about the things that are hard in your life, and you deserve the same. I don't always get the balance right, between the work and the people. I've gotten it wrong before, and I can't promise I won't again. Ryan stood by his truck in the November park with his hands in his jacket pockets. I don't need a promise, he said. I need the same thing you probably need. Someone who tells me when it's going wrong rather than letting it get worse first. Amelia considered this. That's a fair request. And I'll tell you the same. If I'm retreating, if I'm going quiet in the way I go quiet when something's hard, he exhaled. Call it. I'll answer. She nodded, not the business nod. Something quieter and more personal and less certain. Emma reappeared across the grass with her bag over her shoulder, walking back in the unhurried way of someone who had, in fact, been giving them a minute. She was 14, and she was her mother's daughter, and she was also 4 years into a life that had required her to understand things that kids her age shouldn't need to understand, and she had understood them without becoming hard, which Ryan thought was the most extraordinary thing about her, and the thing he could take the least credit for. "Ready?" she called. "Ready," Ryan said. They drove home through the gray November afternoon, Emma in the back seat talking about tournament brackets, and the Glenbrook goalkeeper and the slightly dubious behavior of the assistant referee on Field 3, and Ryan drove and listened, and the day settled around all of them like something that was still finding its shape but was not afraid of taking the time to find it right. That evening, Ryan sat in the office at the back of the garage. He'd stopped in on the way home to check a parts delivery, and looked at the corkboard and Diane's photo and the overdue notice and Emma's soccer flyer. He didn't have the language for what was happening exactly, or where it was going, or what it would cost and what it would give back. He had a woman who had stood in the rain on a highway and handled it without drama, who had ordered the Reuben at the diner and eaten it without ceremony, who had counted to 63 on a cold Saturday and known the difference between 62 and 63, and been willing to say so. He had Emma in the car saying, "Call it. I'll answer in his own memory," her voice transposed onto a 14-year-old's, which was probably not fair and also probably exactly right. He looked at Diane's photo for a long moment. He didn't say anything to it because he wasn't the type, but he looked at it in the way he sometimes looked at it, with the full acknowledgement of everything it represented and everything it didn't anymore. The way you looked at something that was both permanent and finished, that was yours and also already past. Then he turned off the office light and locked up the garage. Outside, the street was dry. The storm from last Thursday had moved on, the way all storms eventually did, leaving the roads clean and the air cold and the ordinary world slightly rearranged from how it had been before. He drove home. 3 weeks into whatever this was, Ryan made a mistake. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of mistake that arrived with warning signs or a clear moment of decision. It was the quiet kind. The kind that accumulates in small increments until you look back and realize you've been building it for a while without noticing. The mistake was this. He started measuring, not consciously, not with a spreadsheet or a list, but somewhere in the back of his mind, in the hours between seeing Amelia and seeing her again, a part of Ryan Carter that he generally kept managed and away from things he cared about had begun the work of inventory. The Mercedes against the truck. The 42nd floor against the 2-story rental on Callaway, the boardrooms against Bay 3, the way her name appeared in industry publications against the way his name appeared nowhere at all outside the sign above his own door. He knew this was happening, and he kept doing it anyway, which was the honest assessment. Amelia, for her part, was not making it easier in the way she couldn't help not making it easier, by being, without apparent effort, entirely herself. She called on Wednesday evenings, usually around 8, which was after Emma's homework was done and before the garage paperwork that Ryan pushed to 9. The calls ran 40 minutes to an hour. They talked about things that were specific and real. His week, her week, Emma's ongoing documentation of the ocean's most alarming residents, a board meeting that had gone sideways in ways that Amelia described with dry precision, a conversation Ryan had with Dale Hutchins that week, that had turned unexpectedly personal when Dale mentioned his wife by name for the first time since her death. He said her name and then looked surprised, Ryan told her, like it came out before he could stop it. Like saying it out loud was different from carrying it, Amelia said. Yeah. He was in the kitchen, which was where he usually took these calls, leaning against the counter with the lights low because Emma had gone upstairs. He didn't apologize for it. He just kept talking, like he'd decided something. Amelia was quiet for a moment. That's a good sign. When people stop apologizing for their grief. Ryan turned his coffee mug in his hands. How'd you get smart about grief? My mother, she said. She died when I was 19, breast cancer. She said it plainly, the way people said things they'd had a long time to make peace with. My father handled it by working so much that we barely spoke for 2 years. I handled it by convincing myself that functioning was the same as healing. Neither of us were right, but we eventually got somewhere. You never mentioned her. You never asked. That's fair. He paused. I'm asking now. Her name was Judith, Amelia said. She played piano badly and read voraciously and argued with my father about everything and meant every word of it. She had this laugh that was too loud for whatever room she was in. She didn't care. A pause that contained something he couldn't entirely see from his end. I think about her sometimes when I'm in the boardroom, being the right kind of quiet for the right kind of room, and wonder what she would have thought of that. She'd have had notes, Ryan said. Amelia made a sound that was mostly laugh and partly something else. She absolutely would have. These were the Wednesday calls, and they were the part of the week that Ryan looked forward to in a way he'd stopped questioning because questioning it led to the measuring, and the measuring led to the bad place. The bad place arrived, as bad places tend to, on a Tuesday. It was mid-November, 3.5 weeks after the highway, and the occasion was a small thing that became a large thing in the particular way of small things that catch you in the wrong state of mind. Ryan was at the parts supplier on Callaway picking up a delivery, belts, filters, a set of brake rotors for a job that was already a day behind, when he ran into Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was the kind of man who existed in every mid-sized city, the successful one from the neighborhood, the one who had gone to the right schools and married the right woman and accumulated the right set of affiliations. He ran a commercial real estate firm that had done well in the last development cycle. He wore clothes that fit in the way clothes fit when someone has decided that clothes should fit, and he moved through spaces with the practiced ease of someone who expected them to accommodate him. Ryan knew Marcus from high school. They had not been friends then. They were not enemies either. The relationship had the specific texture of two people who had existed in the same space for years without ever finding a reason to really connect. Marcus had made a point, on the 3 or 4 occasions they'd run into each other since, of being generous in the distancing way of someone cataloging the difference between where they'd arrived and where you'd arrived, without saying so directly. Ryan Carter, Marcus said, at the parts counter, in a tone that contained the implication of surprise even when there was none. Haven't seen you since, July? 4th of July thing at the Hendersons? Probably, Ryan said. How's the garage? Still on Merchant? Still on Merchant. Marcus nodded with the sympathetic tilt of someone receiving information about a condition they're glad not to share. Tough market for independent shops. I've been reading about the consolidation. Big service centers taking the fleet accounts. He shook his head. Must be a grind. It's a business, Ryan said. Sure. Marcus picked up a bag from the counter. He was apparently here for something small, something personal. Ryan noted this without significance. Hey, I heard something actually. Someone told me you've been seen around town with Amelia Sinclair. Ryan looked at him. I know people who run in her circles, Marcus said, in the tone of someone establishing credentials. Board people, investment contacts. She's a serious player. She's 29, 30, and she's running a company that size. He tilted his head with the expression of someone about to say something helpful. I'm just going to say, I heard that too, and I'll be honest, I was a little surprised. That's not, no offense, Ryan, that's not usually the world she moves in. Her last serious relationship was with a venture capital guy, big firm out of Chicago. Before that, a tech founder. He smiled with the particular caliber of smile that was worse than no smile at all. Just something to be aware of. I've seen those situations before. Different worlds, different expectations. Doesn't always... He made a vague gesture with one hand. Land well. Ryan paid for his parts. Good to see you, Marcus, he said, and left. He drove back to the garage. He unloaded the delivery. He started on the brake job and worked steadily through the afternoon and did not think about Marcus Webb or what Marcus Webb had said. And this discipline lasted approximately 4 hours before it didn't. It was the venture capital guy that did it. Not Marcus, not the smile, not the careful architecture of condescension dressed as concern. It was the specific and deliberate recitation of what Amelia's previous relationships looked like. A venture capital guy, a tech founder, delivered in the tone of someone who wanted to make sure Ryan understood the lineup he was trying to join. And the thing was, Marcus had done what bad information always does. He'd aimed it at something that was already sore. That night, Ryan was quiet in a way Emma noticed. They ate dinner, pasta again, this time the kind Ryan made himself from a recipe that Diane had taught him in the second year of their marriage, which he still made from memory without measuring anything. And Emma talked about a group project at school that was going poorly due to what she described as fundamental disagreements about the definition of effort, and Ryan responded at the right moments and asked a question when the conversation needed one, but his eyes were somewhere else, and Emma, who was her mother's daughter and missed very little, stopped talking about the group project and said, "What happened?" Ba di osiki borstik. Not a question, a statement addressed to the situation. "Nothing happened," Ryan said. "You're doing the quiet thing." "I'm just tired." "You're tired different from regular tired." She put her fork down. "Did something happen with Amelia?" "No." "Did something happen at the garage?" "Not." "No." He moved food around his plate. "I ran into someone today. Marcus Webb. You don't know him." He paused. "He said something that was meant to get in my head, and it got in my head, and I'm annoyed that it got in my head." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What did he say?" Ryan looked up. He considered briefly the version where he deflected and then put it down. "He said that Amelia usually moves in different circles, higher circles, and that things like this, whatever this is, don't usually work out." Emma looked at him with the steady, dark eyes. "Do you think he's wrong?" she asked. Ryan set down his fork. "I think he's an ass." "That's not what I asked." He sat back. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know if he's wrong. I know that I've been aware of the gap from the beginning, and most of the time I manage to just not let it be the thing I'm thinking about. And then someone says it out loud, and it's..." He shook his head. "Harder once it's been said," Emma said. "Yeah." She picked her fork back up. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think the gap goes both ways. Like, she has things you don't have, but she came to my soccer game and counted to 63. She paused. "Nobody does that to impress someone. That's just who she is." Ryan looked at his daughter across the dinner table. "When did you get this wise?" he said. "I've told you. It's a documented pattern." She pointed at his plate. "Eat your pasta." He ate his pasta. He texted Amelia that night, later. Not about Marcus. Not about any of it. Just the Wednesday call equivalent in text form. Something specific about his day, a question about hers. She answered 20 minutes later with a response that was 3 paragraphs and an aside about her CFO that made him laugh in the kitchen in the dark. He put the phone down and went to bed and slept better than he had in a while. And in the morning, the measuring was still there, but quieter, the way problems go quiet when you've stopped feeding them. He did not call Marcus Webb back. He did not think about venture capital guys. He went to the garage and replaced the brake rotors and fixed the fan belt on the Honda and ordered coffee from the place across the street and worked through the day, and the day was ordinary in all the right ways. 2 Saturdays later, Amelia asked him to come to the city. This was different. All the previous meetings had been in Ryan's geography. Merchant Street, Hendricks Park, the Meridian Bistro, which was technically equidistant, but had felt like his territory given the circumstances of arrival. The city was her territory. The 42nd floor and the boardrooms and the world that Marcus Webb had been at pains to describe. Ryan agreed without deliberating about it, because deliberating about it would have been the measuring, and he was trying to stop doing the measuring. She told him it was a Saturday afternoon, and that she wanted to show him something, and that he should dress like himself, which he'd appreciated because it meant she wasn't going to ask him to be something else for an afternoon, which was the version of this he'd quietly been worried about. He drove into the city on a Saturday at noon. He parked in a structure 4 blocks from the Sinclair Automotive Headquarters building, because Amelia had said to park there, and he had no counter-proposal. He walked the 4 blocks in the November cold, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the city do what cities did on Saturday afternoons. Move in an unscheduled way, purposeful but not hurried. She met him at the lobby of the building, which was glass and steel, and the kind of architectural commitment that said this company has been here a while and intends to stay. She was in jeans and a dark sweater and the green parka from the soccer game, and she looked like the version of herself that he'd decided was his favorite version, which was the version that had apparently given up on performing anything. "Thanks for coming into the city," she said. "Thanks for the parking structure recommendation. I was not going to figure that out myself. The street parking is a war crime on Saturdays." She led him through the lobby, past the security desk where the guard said Ms. Sinclair in the practiced way of someone for whom this greeting was daily routine, and toward a bank of elevators. "I want to show you the service floor before we leave. Then we're going somewhere else." "The service floor?" he said. "Third floor. We run a diagnostic and light service center for fleet vehicles. It's smaller than your setup. We focus on specific makes, mostly our own fleet and contracted accounts." She pressed the elevator button. "I want your opinion on something." This was unexpected enough that he didn't have a ready response. The third floor was a working space, not a showroom, not an executive presentation of capability, but an actual service environment with 4 bays, a parts room, a small customer-facing desk. On a Saturday, it was running a skeleton crew, 2 technicians, one of whom was working on an EV diagnostics issue that Ryan could identify from the equipment configuration before he got close enough to read the screen. "The EV turnaround," Amelia said, watching him. "We've been struggling with it. The diagnostic software is good, but the technician time on certain fault codes is longer than it should be. I've talked to my service manager about it. He has theories. I have theories. I wanted someone else's read." Ryan walked over to the bay. The technician, a young woman named Dara, whose name was embroidered on her uniform, looked up without hostility. Ryan introduced himself by first name only. "What's the fault code?" he asked. "BMS fault, cell balance error," Dara said. "Keeps throwing it after reset. I've run the cycle twice." Ryan looked at the screen. He asked 2 questions, about the charge history and about whether the cell balance delta had been manually checked against the OEM spec, rather than relying on the system's internal comparison. Dara answered both. Ryan thought about it for a moment. "Your diagnostic software is flagging an error condition that exists at the edge of the tolerance range," he said. "It's not a fault, technically. It's a variance that the system is treating as a fault because the threshold is set conservatively. Your OEM rep can push a calibration update that moves the threshold to the actual spec margin, saves you the reset cycles and the technician time." Dara looked at him, then at the screen, then back at him. "The OEM rep told us the settings were standard." "Standard for their default fleet configuration," Ryan said. "Not necessarily for your use case. The charge cycles on a fleet vehicle are different from a consumer vehicle. You're running these cars differently than the algorithm expects." Amelia, standing behind him, said nothing. Dara wrote something down. They left the floor 10 minutes later. In the elevator, Amelia looked at him. "My service manager has been arguing with the OEM rep for 3 weeks about that car," she said. "It's a calibration conversation, not a fault conversation. That distinction gets lost sometimes." She looked at him for a moment. Not the assessment look from earlier months, something more settled than that. "Thank you," she said. "You brought me here to watch me look at a car." "I brought you here because I respect what you know," she said. "And because I thought it would be useful. And because—" She paused. "I wanted you to see this part of my world in a way that had something to do with who you actually are, rather than just the glass lobby and the security guard saying my name." The elevator opened. They walked back through the lobby, past the security guard, out into the November afternoon. She took him to a neighborhood 15 blocks north that Ryan had driven through but never spent time in. A grid of older commercial buildings that had been partly converted in the particular way of neighborhoods in transition, the kind where a specialty coffee place exists between a hardware store that's been there 40 years and a vacant storefront with paper in the windows. They walked. She knew the neighborhood, stopped at specific points to point things out. A building her company had considered for a satellite office, a mural on a retaining wall that she liked without needing to explain why, a corner market where she apparently bought things she couldn't get delivered to the 42nd floor. "You come here," he said. "When I need to remember what normal feels like," she said, "which happens more than the job would prefer." They got coffee from a place that had no corporate branding, just a name above the door and 4 tables inside. They sat at one of the tables, the afternoon pressed against the window in the gray November way. A man at the counter was arguing pleasantly with the barista about something that seemed to involve the local sports team. "I need to tell you about this week," Amelia said. Her voice had changed registers. The slight drop in tone that he'd learned meant she was about to say something she'd been carrying. "Tell me," he said. "The Portland acquisition." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "It's moving faster than I expected. The seller wants to close before year-end for tax reasons. That means I'm going to be up there. Portland. Probably 3 of the next 6 weeks." She looked at him. "I'm telling you now rather than when it starts because I don't want you to think I'm disappearing." "Okay. I'm also telling you because I was in a situation 2 years ago where I didn't tell someone this, didn't tell them how much my schedule was about to demand from me, and they found out through the absence rather than through me. And that," she stopped, ordered something inside herself, continued. "That was a mistake I made. I'm trying not to repeat it." Ryan held his coffee cup. The man at the counter had resolved his sports team dispute and was leaving with his order. Outside, 2 people walked a very small dog with enormous determination. "Who is he?" Ryan asked. Amelia looked at him carefully. "Someone who deserved better from me," she said. "Not in the way that sounds. It wasn't a good match, and we both knew it. But the way it ended was on me. I went to ground when things got hard at work, and I told myself he'd understand, and I didn't ask if he understood. I just assumed. And he didn't. He left, which was the right call." She paused. "His name was David. He was a good person. I was a bad partner for the last 4 months we were together." Ryan nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me that." "You told me about Diane," she said. "The things you told me about Diane weren't a summary. They were real. So," he drank his coffee. The coffee was excellent, which he noted because it was true, and because noticing small, true things was sometimes the best he could do when larger things were being processed. 3 of 6 weeks in Portland," he said, "starting the 2nd week of December." "That's a lot of travel." "It is." She met his eyes. "I don't know how to make my job smaller," she said. "I've tried. It doesn't get smaller. It just redistributes." A pause. "I can tell you that I'm aware of it and that I'll try to be present when I'm here. But I can't promise a version of my life that doesn't exist." Ryan thought about what she'd said on the sidewalk outside the diner, the first Thursday. "I can't promise a version of my life that doesn't exist." She'd said something in that neighborhood then, too. She said true things with the directness of someone who had learned that the alternative was worse. "I'm not asking for that," he said. "I'm not going to ask you to manage your company differently because you're—" He paused, found the word. "Because we're doing this." "Some people would. Some people might have the right to, eventually," he said. "We're not there yet." Amelia held his gaze. Something moved in her expression that he couldn't fully read, but that felt like relief of a specific kind. The relief of not having to argue for the space to be who she was. "Okay," she said. "But the same thing goes," he said. "When things get hard at the garage, and they're going to get harder before they get better, the way things are set up financially right now, I'm going to go quiet in a way that isn't about you. And I'd rather you know that in advance than find out through the absence." She tilted her head slightly. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about it," he admitted. "The Marcus Webb thing." He stopped. "Who?" "Someone from high school. He said something a couple weeks ago about the gap between your world and mine, and it—" He exhaled. "It landed badly. Not because he was saying something I hadn't thought, but because he was saying it from the outside. And the outside version of something is always flatter," she said. "Less dimension." "Yeah." He looked at the table. "I spent a week being stupid about it, measuring things. And then I stopped, mostly. But the instinct is still there. The instinct to keep a ledger." Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I grew up in a house with more money than most of our neighbors. Not billionaire money. My father was successful, but not what the company became until I was in my 20s. And I spent a lot of time being very aware of the difference between us and the kids at school who had less, and trying to pretend I wasn't aware of it, and getting it wrong in both directions." She looked at him. "What I learned eventually, and it took too long, is that the people who are worth anything don't keep the ledger. They just don't. And the people who do, she shook her head, they're usually measuring something that has nothing to do with you. Marcus Webb has nothing to do with me, Ryan said. Then don't give him the square footage in your head. Ryan looked at her across the small table in the coffee place with no corporate branding, and the man from the counter was gone, and the small dog outside was gone, and it was just the two of them in the gray afternoon, and he thought, this is the thing that has been happening for the past month. Not a performance, not a strategy, just two people who had chosen to be honest with each other because the alternative was already familiar and already not enough. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask. Emma's school does a parent thing in December, before the Christmas break. It's in the evening. It's the kind of thing that's loud and crowded, and the food is from a parent committee, which means it's a mixed bag. It's not the Meridian Bistro. He held her eyes. But Emma matters, and this is her space, and I'd like you to be there if you want to be, not to meet anyone, not performing anything, just there. The shift in Amelia's expression was not dramatic. It was the quiet kind of shift, the kind that happened below the line of what most people would catch. But Ryan was watching, and he caught it. The thing that moved through her eyes when he said Emma matters in the same sentence as the invitation, in a way that made the two things inseparable. I want to be, she said. Okay. When is it? December 12th. She took out her phone and added it without ceremony, which was exactly right. They left the coffee place at 4:30, walking back toward the garage structure through the cooling afternoon. The city moved around them in the Saturday way. Amelia pointed out 3 more things she wanted him to see. A building facade from 1924 that had survived 3 cycles of neighborhood reinvention, a garden behind an iron gate that apparently opened seasonally and which she had stumbled on 2 years ago and considered something close to a secret, a street corner where the angle of the adjacent buildings created an eddy of warm air even in November, which had no explanation she'd ever worked out and which delighted her for exactly that reason. He listened and looked. He asked questions about the garden. She answered with the particular animation of someone who has been waiting to share something and has finally found the right person to share it with. At the parking structure, he stopped. Thank you, he said, for today, the service floor, the coffee, the city. Thank you for not wearing the gray shirt, she said. He laughed. Emma's going to say she called that. Emma called everything, Amelia said. I've accepted it. They stood at the entrance to the parking structure, and the November city moved around them, and neither of them was performing patience or pretending that what was happening was smaller than it was. He kissed her then. Not planned, not preceded by analysis. He just leaned forward and she was already there, and it was brief and real and slightly cold from the November air, and when he stepped back, she looked at him with the expression she had when something had exceeded her expectations in a direction she hadn't predicted, which he had learned to recognize and which was one of his favorite things about her. Drive safe, she said. You too. She walked one direction. He went up the ramp to his truck. He drove home through the city and then through the smaller streets and then through the neighborhood, and he passed the garage on his way, the dark sign above the door, Carter Automotive, his father's name in lit letters, and he thought about the service floor and the BMS fault code and the look on Amelia's face when he answered Dara's question, which was not the look of someone watching a performance, but the look of someone seeing something confirmed. He pulled into Calloway Street. Emma's desk lamp was on. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off, in the driveway of the house that was too big for 2 people and just right for what it contained. And he thought about David, who Amelia had left through absence, and about Diane, who the universe had taken through the kind of suddenness that made all the slow, ordinary losses feel like luxury, and about Marcus Webb and his careful inventory of things that didn't belong to him. And he thought about a coffee place with 4 tables and no corporate branding, and a garden behind an iron gate, and a warm eddy of air on a November corner with no sensible explanation. And about 63, not 62. He went inside. Emma was at the kitchen table with an ocean documentary running quiet on her laptop. A different one from last week. The narrator's voice describing something that lived in absolute darkness, miles below the surface, and had adapted to the pressure by becoming something entirely different from what it had started as. Emma looked up when he came in. She read his face. Yeah, she said. Yeah, he said. She smiled in the way she smiled when she was right about something she'd known for a while, which was quietly and without unnecessary comment, and went back to the documentary. Ryan hung up his jacket and went to make the late coffee he didn't strictly need and that he was going to make anyway, and the house was warm and the ocean narrator talked about adaptation, and outside the November night was cold and ordinary and entirely fine. The December school event was on a Thursday, which meant Ryan left the garage early, not something he did often, and which required a specific reshuffling of the week's work that he managed by staying 2 hours late on both Tuesday and Wednesday. He didn't mention this to Amelia. It wasn't martyrdom, it was logistics. The garage didn't run itself, and the work didn't disappear because something else mattered on a particular evening. So you moved the pieces and you made the evening work, and that was the whole of it. Emma had been carefully unconcerned about the event all week, which was her version of deeply concerned. She'd mentioned twice, with the precision of someone calibrating how many times was appropriate, that the night would be crowded and loud, and that the gym where the main gathering happened got warm. And both times Ryan had confirmed that he'd passed this information along to Amelia, and both times Emma had said, "Okay, just so she knows," and gone back to whatever she'd been doing, with the studied neutrality of someone who cared more than she was admitting. Amelia arrived at the school at 6:58 in the green parka, which Ryan had come to think of as her most honest coat, the one she wore when she wasn't going anywhere that required her to be Sinclair Automotive first and herself second. She found them in the main hallway outside the gymnasium, where the noise was already substantial and a parent committee volunteer was directing foot traffic with the besieged competence of someone who had underestimated the attendance. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Emma said, and the single syllable contained about 40% more warmth than her default register, which Ryan noted and which meant more to him than he would have known how to explain. They went in. The gymnasium had been decorated with the conscientious enthusiasm of a committee that cared deeply and had a limited budget. Paper chains, hand-lettered signs, a folding table of baked goods along the south wall that had been partially depleted already. The noise was the specific combination of 200 people talking in a concrete-floored space with a high ceiling. Ryan navigated it the way he navigated the garage on a complicated day, by staying oriented and not trying to process everything at once. Amelia stayed close, but not perform close. She didn't hold his arm or make any gesture that telegraphed a relationship to the surrounding crowd. She just moved with him through the room with the natural ease of someone who was actually comfortable being where she was, which, given that she spent most of her professional life in spaces that had been specifically designed to project authority and manage perception, Ryan found quietly remarkable. Emma peeled off to find her teammates within 3 minutes. This was expected. Ryan watched her go with the specific parental awareness that she'd checked before she left, that he was fine, which she did by making eye contact with him briefly and getting a small nod back. The transaction was invisible to anyone who didn't know them. "She's checking on you," Amelia said at his shoulder. "She does that. And you let her." "It costs nothing," he said, "and it matters to her. So." Lisa Tran appeared from the direction of the baked goods table with a brownie in one hand and a genuine smile, and introductions were made. Lisa was good at people, comfortable and specific, and genuinely interested in whoever was in front of her. And Amelia, to her credit, received the warmth without deflecting it or deploying the executive version of herself that Ryan had seen her use when the situation seemed to call for managed distance. They talked for a while, about Emma's team, about the tournament, about the spring league. Lisa mentioned, with the friendly casualness of someone who didn't know that the information was redundant, that Ryan had been on the parent committee for 3 years and had once personally rebuilt a piece of training equipment that the school couldn't afford to replace, which made the equipment functional again for 2 seasons. She said this in the tone of casual community record, the way people cite the things that matter in a neighborhood. Ryan would have preferred she not mention it. Amelia looked at him with an expression that was brief and contained and told him she'd heard it and wasn't going to make something of it in front of Lisa, which was exactly right. They moved through the evening. They ate the baked goods, which were, as advertised, a mixed bag. One excellent lemon bar that Amelia identified correctly as the work of someone who knew what they were doing, and one blondie that both of them assessed silently and set down after 2 bites. Ryan talked to the coach for 15 minutes about spring scheduling. Amelia was introduced to 4 other parents across the course of the evening, and navigated each introduction with the adaptability of someone who understood that this room worked by different rules than the rooms she usually occupied, and that the rules were not lesser for being different. At 8:30, Emma found them again, with two of her teammates in tow. Jasmine, who was the goalkeeper and had the contained intensity of a natural last line of defense, and Priya, who played right wing and talked fast and immediately asked Amelia what she did for work with the directness of someone who had not yet learned to soften the question. Amelia told her. The short version, the actual version, she ran an automotive company, headquartered downtown. They managed fleet vehicles and dealership networks. So you know about cars, Priya said. I know about the business of cars, Amelia said. She indicated Ryan, knows about the actual cars. Priya looked at Ryan. Are you like a mechanic? Like a mechanic, yes, he said. My dad's car makes this sound, Priya said, and proceeded to describe with creative phonetic accuracy what sounded like a heat shield rattle on a cold start. Ryan diagnosed it in approximately 30 seconds and told her what to tell her father, who she said was going to be very relieved because he'd been worrying about it for 2 months. Emma, standing beside him, was smiling at her cleats. They left at 9:15, after Emma had gone back to her friends and made it clear she'd get a ride home with Jasmine's parents, which had been pre-cleared and which released Ryan from a logistical obligation he'd been quietly managing in the background. Outside, the December air was cold and clean after the gymnasium. They stood on the school steps in the dark, and the parking lot lights threw their orange color across the wet pavement, and the night had the particular quality of early December. The cold that was establishing itself now for the season, settling in like something that intended to stay. Thank you, Amelia said. For what? For this. She gestured vaguely at the school, the evening, the whole shape of it. For inviting me into something that actually belongs to you. Ryan looked at her. She was slightly cold. He could tell by the way her shoulders had shifted in the parka. And her cheeks were more color than usual from the warm gymnasium. And she looked more simply herself than he had ever seen her in a context that was not the diner or the coffee place or a soccer field on a Saturday. You did well in there, he said. I didn't do anything. That's what I mean. She looked at him for a moment, then looked out at the parking lot, then looked back at him. I want to tell you something. He waited. I've been in professional environments where I had to perform being okay with something until being okay with it became real, she said. Boardrooms, acquisition negotiations, public appearances. You learn to front-run the feeling. She paused. Tonight I didn't have to do that at all. I was just here. She seemed slightly surprised by this, as if it had become clear during the telling. I just wanted you to know that. He leaned over and kissed her on the school steps in the December dark, which he did without deliberation because there was no reason for deliberation. Drive safe, he said. You too. She went to her car. He went to his truck. He drove home and Emma's lamp was off, which meant Jasmine's parents had already dropped her, which meant everything was accounted for. And he went inside and the house was quiet in the best way, and he stood in the kitchen for a moment just being inside it before going upstairs. The week after the school event, the Portland trip started. Amelia had warned him. She'd been clear about the timeline and the demands, and had done everything right in terms of preparation, and it was still harder than either of them had quite accounted for. Not dramatically hard, not the kind of hard that had a clean shape you could address. The low-grade hard of a schedule that was suddenly full of gaps where the Wednesday calls had been, and text threads that went 4 hours between responses because she was in back-to-back meetings, and he was 3 cars deep on a Friday afternoon, and neither of them had time to sustain the pace they'd established. He knew she was dealing with it. She texted when she could. Specific, real messages, not the maintenance kind that said thinking of you and carried no information. She sent him a photo of the Portland harbor at 7 in the morning from her hotel window with a message that said, "This city wakes up early and is smug about it," which made him laugh alone in the garage at 7:15. She called Sunday evenings when she was back for the weeks she made it back, and the calls were still the calls. Still the same quality of attention, the same willingness to say the actual thing rather than the easier approximation of it. But the gaps were real. And Ryan, who had built a life around the discipline of not needing things he couldn't reliably have, found that he had gotten less disciplined than he'd realized. He noticed this about himself with the objectivity of someone taking inventory. He wasn't dramatic about it. He didn't sulk or withdraw or pick unnecessary arguments. He just noticed that the space between contacts had a different texture than it used to, a slightly restless quality, the way a room feels different when something that was usually in it is temporarily absent. He talked to Sarah about it. This was notable because Ryan talked to Sarah about personal things approximately 3 times a year and had used up 2 of those instances already in calendar year discussions about the date, and this was a third. "You're attached," Sarah said on the phone, with the tone of someone reporting a fact that they had been privately certain of for some time. "That's one word," he said. "It's the right word. You're attached, and she's in Portland, and you're at the garage, and you're trying to figure out if you're allowed to miss her." A pause. "You're being a person," Sarah said, "an imperfect, somewhat emotionally avoidant person who is trying to be better at being a person than you've had to be for the past 4 years. It's good. It's uncomfortable, but it's good." "It's very uncomfortable," he said. "That's because you're doing it right." He could hear her moving around her kitchen, the sound of her boys in the background, the TV noise. "Ryan, call her. She's probably in a meeting. Leave a voicemail or a text, or just say I'm thinking about you like a normal human being who likes another human being. I don't know how to... Start with the words I'm thinking about you. See what happens." He thanked her and got off the phone and stood in the garage office for a full minute. Then he texted Amelia, "Miss our Wednesday calls, that's all." She replied 40 minutes later, from what was clearly a meeting break based on the timing, "I miss them too, more than I expected to." Back Sunday. "Can we make it work Sunday?" "Sunday works," he wrote back. He put the phone down and went back under the car he'd been avoiding and worked until 7, which was late. And when he got home, Emma had made pasta again, and the ocean documentary was on low, and the house was quiet and warm. And Ryan sat at the kitchen table and ate his pasta and thought that this was the life he'd built, and it was a good life. And that the good life had room in it now for something additional, something that was currently in Portland dealing with the year-end close on an acquisition, and that both of these things were simultaneously true, and that maybe that was enough. The thing that changed the shape of December arrived not from Portland, but from the garage. On the second Tuesday of the month, Ryan came in to find a voicemail from Fletcher Commercial Services, one of the 2 fleet accounts he'd been quietly hemorrhaging. The voicemail was from the fleet manager, a man named Tom Garrett, and the news was not good. Fletcher had completed their transition to Meridian Service Group, the consolidated chain that had been picking up independent accounts across the region for the past 18 months. The contract, such as it was done as of January 1st. Ryan replayed the voicemail twice to make sure he'd heard it right. Then he sat in the office with the coffee he hadn't yet drunk and did the math he'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. The math was not good. Without the Fletcher account and with the other fleet account already gone since September, the garage's monthly revenue was below the threshold that covered rent, utilities, parts overhead, and his own draw with any margin. Not bankruptcy, not immediately, but the kind of deficit that, if it ran for more than 2 or 3 months without correction, turned into a decision point he didn't want to reach. He sat with this for a while before he moved. He didn't call Sarah. He didn't text Amelia. He got up, went back to the floor, and worked through the day with the contained focus of someone who had decided that moving forward was the only productive response to a problem that was currently unfixable. He did the oil change on Mrs. Patterson's Subaru. He diagnosed the noise on a Civic that turned out to be a simple idler pulley. He ordered parts for Thursday. He locked up at 6:30 and drove home in the dark. He told Emma at dinner, not in a panicked way, in the measured, factual way he tried to handle difficult things with her, which was the way Diane had always said you should handle difficult things with kids, as facts to be addressed rather than disasters to be survived. "One of the big accounts is gone," he said. "As of January. It's going to make this first part of the year harder than usual." Emma looked at him. "How hard?" "Manageable," he said, "if I replace some of the volume. I'm going to put some time into outreach. There are independent shops that refer overflow work, and there are a couple of small fleet accounts I've had conversations with that I'll follow up on." He drank his water. "I'm not worried. I'm being practical." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" He looked at her. "I need you to not worry about it," he said. "That's the specific thing I need from you." She nodded, but the way she nodded said, I'll try, but I make no guarantees, which was the honest answer. That Sunday, when Amelia called from the city, back from Portland, second week complete, one more trip scheduled after the holidays, Ryan did not mention the Fletcher account. This was a deliberate choice, not because he was hiding it, but because the Sunday call was an hour they'd both protected from exactly this kind of weight. And he had a complicated enough relationship with the line between privacy and withdrawal that he wanted to think it through before deciding how to handle it. He thought about it for 2 days. On Tuesday, he told her. They were on the phone in the evening. He said it plainly. The account was gone. The numbers were tighter than he'd like. He was working on solutions. Amelia listened without interrupting. "What's the gap, roughly?" she asked. "Monthly?" "About 4,000 to 5,000 in revenue I need to replace." She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone calculating, the silence of someone being careful. "Okay," she said. "I'm not telling you because I want—" "I know," she said, and her voice was even and certain. "I know that." A pause. "Have you talked to the Small Business Development Office? They have a fleet matchmaking program. Connects independent shops with small regional fleets who aren't a fit for the big service centers. It's low profile, under-publicized, but the matches tend to be sticky." He hadn't known about it. "Where do you know that from?" "Because I sit on the board of the Regional Chamber of Commerce," she said, "and we helped fund that program 18 months ago." She paused. "I can send you the contact information. That's me sending you a resource, not anything else, okay?" "Okay," he said. She sent it 10 minutes later. A name, a phone number, a one-line explanation. No flourish, no follow-up pressure. He called the number the next morning. The woman on the other end, a person named Jackie, with the organized efficiency of someone who was very good at her specific job, asked him 4 questions about the garage's capacity and service range and told him she'd be in touch within a week. He gave her the information and thanked her and went back to work. Amelia had given him a resource. She had not rescued him. He held this distinction carefully, aware that it mattered, aware that she'd been aware of it when she offered it. The third Portland trip was the week before Christmas. She left on a Monday and came back on a Thursday, which was the 23rd. And this was the trip that did what the previous 2 hadn't quite. It frayed something, not dramatically, but in the way constant tension frays rope. Ryan was having a bad week. He could recognize bad weeks now with the clinical detachment of someone who had learned their own patterns. The slightly shortened patience, the 3 a.m. kitchen visits that Emma had been noticing since year 1, the way the corkboard in the office became a thing he didn't look at directly. The garage's financial pressure was a constant low frequency under everything. The holiday approached with its complicated mix of obligations and absences. The things that had been different since Diane and had never fully normalized, even 4 years out. Emma had a school event he missed because of a job that ran late, and she'd been easy about it, which somehow made it worse. He and Amelia texted across the Portland distance, and the communication was functional and real, and she was managing her end and he was managing his. And what it lacked was the thing you couldn't replicate in text, which was presence. On Wednesday evening, from Portland, she called. He almost didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to talk to her, but because he was sitting in the garage office at 8 p.m. with the books open and the fluorescent light in Bay 3 doing its irregular pulse. And he was tired in the specific way that accumulated over several weeks of everything pressing at once, and he wasn't sure he could be good company. He answered. "Hey," she said. "Hey." A brief pause. She heard it. He knew she heard it because she was good at hearing it. "How bad is the week?" she asked. "Mediocre," he said. "Not a disaster. Just a lot of things at the same pressure point." "Tell me the worst one." He told her about Emma's event, the one he'd missed. He said it plainly. The job ran late, he'd called, Emma had been fine about it, and he'd been unable to stop replaying the specific moment of calling her and hearing her say it's okay. Dad in the voice that was too careful to mean it was fully okay. Amelia listened. "She knows it wasn't on purpose," she said. "I know. And you'll make it right." "I know that too." "So what is it then?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. The fluorescent pulsed. "I think it's—" He stopped. Started again. "There are periods where everything requires something from me at the same time. And I can usually manage that because I've been managing it alone for a while and I know how. But then—" He exhaled. But then there's something that's good and new, and I want to be available for it properly, and I don't know how to do all of it at the same time." "You mean me," she said. "I mean you." The silence on Portland's end was the kind that meant she was thinking, rather than the kind that meant she'd pulled back. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it and not argue with it." "Tell me." "You are not managing me." Her voice was level and direct and warm all at once. "You don't have to perform being available for me. I know what your life looks like. You've shown me all of it. I know the garage and the books and Emma's events and the 3 a.m. kitchen visits. Though you didn't tell me about those, I inferred them." A pause. "I don't need you to have capacity you don't have right now. I just need you to tell me when things are hard, like you're doing right now." Ryan sat in the garage office at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday, 3 days before Christmas, and the city outside was doing the December thing with the lights and the cold, and the office smelled like coffee and motor oil, and the photo of Diane was on the corkboard in his peripheral vision, and he felt something that he did not yet have a complete word for, but that lived in the neighborhood of gratitude and was close neighbors with something more. "I'm glad you're coming back Thursday," he said. "I'm glad to be coming back Thursday," she said. They talked for an hour, not about problems, about the things they usually talked about, the specific and real things. She told him about the acquisition closing timeline, which was ahead of schedule for once, and he told her that the SBDC contact had called back and there was a promising conversation happening with a small logistics company that needed service work. They talked about Christmas. She was going to her father's in Scottsdale for 3 days. He was staying here with Emma and Sarah's family coming over on the 25th. "I'd like to talk on Christmas," she said. It's not weird," he said, which was what she was going to ask. "I'd like that too." She came back Thursday as promised, and he met her for dinner. Not the Meridian, somewhere smaller, the kind of place where you could talk without managing the atmosphere. She looked tired in the way people looked when they'd been running hard for several weeks and had finally stopped. She ate her food. She asked about Emma. He asked about Portland. And at a certain point during dinner, she looked at him across the table and said, without preamble, "I don't want to lose this." He looked at her. "I'm saying it because it's December, and it's been a complicated month, and I want you to know it," she said. "Not as pressure, just as a fact I want to say out loud." Ryan turned his fork on the table. The restaurant was warm and not too loud, and the food was honest in the way of places that had nothing to prove. "I don't want to lose it either," he said. She nodded. They ate the rest of dinner in the comfortable way of people who have said what needed saying and don't need to keep saying it. Outside, the December city was cold and lit, the holiday version of itself that lasted approximately 3 weeks and then went back to being regular December. They stood on the sidewalk, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into it without ceremony, and they stood there for a moment being two people in the ordinary cold. "Scottsdale," he said. 3 days. Call me when you land." "I'll call you when I land." He drove home through the Christmas lights, and the cold, and the familiar streets. Emma was awake. Of course she was. And they watched half a movie together on the couch, an old one that Emma had seen twice and Ryan had somehow never seen. And Emma quoted the best lines under her breath a second before they arrived, which made Ryan laugh every single time, which he suspected was a significant portion of the point. He fell asleep before the movie ended and woke up with a throw blanket over him that he definitely hadn't put there himself. And the television was off and the house was quiet, and he was 32 years old in a rented house on Callaway Street with a corkboard in his garage and a daughter who covered him with blankets and a woman in Scottsdale who was going to call when she landed. He lay there in the dark for a minute. Then he went upstairs to bed and slept straight through, which was the best night's sleep he'd had in 3 weeks, and which was, in its own small way, a kind of answer to a question he hadn't known he was still asking. The property management company's overdue notice had turned into a conversation, which Ryan handled on the 27th, 2 days after Christmas, by negotiating a 3-month payment arrangement that bought him the runway the SBDC contact was starting to look like it might actually provide. He did this in the office with the door closed and the fluorescent light holding steady above him, and afterwards sat for a while looking at the numbers. Tight, still tight, but not impossible. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he'd seen before but not saved. Marcus Webb. Heard the Fletcher account moved on. "Hard market for independence right now. Let me know if you ever want to talk options." Ryan read the message. He set the phone face down on the desk. He picked it up again and deleted the message without responding. He went back to the numbers, and the numbers were what they were. And he was going to work the problem the way he'd always worked problems, by being good at what he did, and building from what he had, and not asking for more grace than he'd earned. He thought about the SBDC, about Jackie with her organized efficiency, about a conversation with a logistics company that was 3 phone calls deep and felt genuine, about a resource sent from Portland without strings, by a woman who understood the difference between help and rescue and had made sure he understood it too. He thought about the sign over the door. Carter Automotive. 8 years. His father's name in lit letters still standing. He closed the books. He locked the office. He went back out to the floor where there was still work to be done, and he did it. January came in cold and without ceremony. The logistics company was named Hartwell Distribution, a mid-sized regional operation that moved industrial parts across 4 states and had, according to Jackie at the SBDC, been quietly frustrated with their current service provider for the better part of a year. The fleet was 18 vehicles, mostly heavy-duty trucks and 3 cargo vans, and the service volume was exactly the kind of consistent, unglamorous work that an independent garage could build a stable quarter around. Ryan had the 3rd phone call with their operations manager, a direct woman named Carolyn, on the 2nd day of January, sitting in the office with a legal pad and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "We need reliable," Carolyn said. "Not fancy, not a showroom. We need someone who answers the phone when something breaks down at 6 a.m. and doesn't charge us for the privilege of existing." "I answer my own phone," Ryan said, "and I'm at the garage by 7 most days, 6 if the week calls for it." A pause on Carolyn's end that had the quality of someone writing something down. "Can you handle the heavy-duty work? We've got 2 F-35 keys that need consistent attention." "I know that generation of F-Series the way I know my own handwriting," Ryan said. "I've been working on them since they were new." Another pause. "I'll need to see the facility before we commit." "Come whenever you want. Nothing to clean up." Carolyn came on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks into January. She walked the garage with the focused practicality of someone who had been to a lot of facilities and knew what she was looking for. She looked at the equipment, asked 2 specific questions about the lift capacity and the diagnostic software, and spent 45 seconds in the parts room doing a mental inventory. She didn't look at the flickering fluorescent in Bay 3. Ryan appreciated this. It suggested she was evaluating things that mattered. She left at 11, said she'd be in touch by Friday. She called Thursday afternoon. "We'll do a 90-day trial," she said. "First vehicle comes in Monday." Ryan thanked her and got off the phone and sat for a moment in the office. The numbers he'd been running since December shifted into a different configuration. Not solved, not fully corrected, but moved to a position that was workable rather than precarious. The difference between those 2 things was the difference between being able to plan and being unable to. And planning was what Ryan ran on. He texted Amelia. "Hartwell signed. 90-day trial starting Monday." Her reply came in 4 minutes, which meant she'd been in a meeting and had checked her phone on a break. "That's the logistics company from the SBDC?" "Ryan. That's really good news." "It is," he wrote. "Thank you for the contact." "You did the work," she replied. "I just knew a phone number." He put the phone down and went back to the floor and worked through the rest of the day with the particular quality of focus that comes when something that has been pressing on you for months finally moves. The Hartwell trucks started Monday as promised. The first one was an F-350 with 68,000 miles and a service history that Carolyn emailed him the night before, which he read at the kitchen table after dinner while Emma did homework across from him. The service history was thorough. Hartwell kept good records and told Ryan what to expect before the truck arrived, which was the kind of preparation he valued because it meant the morning went clean. Emma watched him rating it. "Is that for the new account?" "The new account." "Is it good?" "It's very thorough," he said, which usually means the person running it cares about what they're doing. Emma nodded with the nod of someone filing this information away. She'd been doing that since the conversation about the Fletcher account in December, maintaining a quiet, low-frequency attention to the garage's condition that she hadn't done as visibly before. Ryan had noticed it and hadn't addressed it directly, partly because addressing it would have meant acknowledging that she'd been worried, and partly because he thought the attention itself was not a bad thing. She was 14 and she was going to be in the world eventually, and understanding that things you cared about required maintenance was not a lesson that arrived too early. The first 2 weeks of January settled into a shape that was different from December. Fuller, more forward-facing. The Hartwell work came in steadily, not overwhelming but consistent, the kind of rhythm a garage could breathe in. Jackie from the SBDC forwarded him 2 more potential contacts, smaller accounts, both of which he was pursuing with the measured optimism of someone who had learned not to count things before they materialized. He and Amelia had found their footing back. The Portland acquisition had closed in the last week of December. She'd called him from the office at 9 p.m. on the 28th, exhausted and slightly elated in the specific way of someone who has finished something significant, and told him it was done. He'd been in his kitchen in the dark with a beer he'd opened 40 minutes earlier and not touched much, and he'd listened to her describe the closing with the animated shorthand of someone debriefing a long campaign. And he'd asked the right questions and she'd answered them, and somewhere in the middle of it she'd said, "I'm so tired, Ryan," in the tone that was not complaining but was just the truth. And he'd said, "I know, you can be tired now. It's done." And she'd gone quiet for a moment that had the texture of relief. They'd talked on Christmas Day as planned, he from his living room while Sarah's family filled the house with the productive chaos of 2 7-year-old boys and football on the television and the smell of food being prepared in the kitchen. She from her father's house in Scottsdale, where she'd stepped outside onto the back patio for privacy, and he could hear the dry warmth in the background that was so foreign to his December that it was almost funny. "How's your father?" he'd asked. "Functional," she'd said, which was her word for it. "We had dinner last night. He told me I looked tired," which was his version of asking how I was doing. I told him the acquisition was closing, which was my version of answering. "Do you ever just talk to him?" A pause. "We're working on it," she said. "It's slow. He's not good at the underneath things. He can manage outcome conversations, subject and predicate conversations. It's the other kind that he circles around." She exhaled. "My mother was the one who did the other kind. When she died, he didn't know how to do it himself, and I think he decided it was safer not to try." She paused. "I understand it more than I used to." "Do you tell him that?" "Last night, actually." She said it quietly, like she was still processing it. "I told him I understood why things went the way they did after she died. He didn't say much, but he looked—" She stopped. He looked relieved, like he'd been waiting for someone to give him that. Ryan had sat with that for a moment. "That was the right thing," he said. "I'm not sure it fixed anything." "It's not supposed to fix everything the first time," he said. "It's just supposed to be said." She'd been quiet then. "You're good at this, you know." "At what?" "At knowing what things are for." Her voice was warm and slightly rough from being tired. "Most people want everything to be a solution. You're okay with things just being what they are." He hadn't known what to say to that exactly, so he'd said nothing, which she seemed to understand. February arrived without drama, which was what Ryan needed from February. The Hartwell trial became a standing arrangement in the 4th week. Carolyn called on a Tuesday and said, with characteristic directness, "The trial was fine. Let's just do this properly." And Ryan said, "Agreed." And that was the conversation. Simple, functional, complete. The kind of business transaction that reminded him why he liked the people who cared about reliable things. They spoke in direct sentences and kept their word and didn't require performance from anyone. The garage's financial picture moved from precarious to stable across 6 weeks. Not dramatically, not in a way that resolved everything permanently, but in the way that meant the property management arrangement could be closed out by March, and the parts overhead could be managed without the specific low-grade anxiety that had been running in the background since September. The fluorescent light in Bay 3 stopped flickering in the 3rd week of January and has not resumed, which Ryan declined to interpret as anything more than a capacitor that had finally found its equilibrium. But he noted it. Amelia was back in her regular rhythm. The Portland trips were done. The acquisition integration had moved to a phase that could be managed remotely, which meant she was in the city 4 days a week and the Wednesday calls were back and the occasional Thursday lunch at Jean's Diner was back. And the thing between them had moved from the slightly uncertain testing phase of December into something that had more solid ground under it. Not that it was without friction. Ryan had been clear-eyed enough with himself by now to stop expecting frictionless. There was an evening in February, a Wednesday actually, when she'd called late after 9, which wasn't usual. And the call had the specific texture of someone who was running on empty and was not entirely in control of how that was coming out. She'd had a board meeting that afternoon that had gone badly in the way board meetings went badly when two members of the board had decided to make a specific governance question into something larger than it was. She described it in clipped, precise sentences that were accurate and also left no room for anything else. Ryan had listened. He'd asked one clarifying question. He'd said what he thought, which was that the two board members in question were doing what people did when they felt their influence slipping. They found a procedural argument because procedural arguments were harder to dismiss than power arguments. Amelia had said yes, that was correct, and then gone quiet. "Are you okay?" he'd asked. "I'm fine," she'd said. Automatic. Amelia, a longer pause. "I'm tired of being the only one in the room who can see the whole board," she said. "I'm tired of having to manage people who are supposed to be managing with me. I'm tired of—" She stopped. "I'm just tired." "Okay," he'd said. "Okay?" she said, with a slight edge that he recognized as displacement, the tired directed sideways. "That's all? You don't need me to fix it," he said. "You know what to do with the board. You've been doing it for 3 years. You just need somewhere to put it for a minute." The edge went out of the pause. "Yes," she said. "So put it here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She talked for another 20 minutes. Not about solutions, just about the weight of it, the accumulated cost of being perpetually the most accountable person in any given room. He'd listened and said the real things when they were called for, and the quiet things when those were called for. And by the end of the call, her voice had lost the tight quality and was just tired, which was honest. "Ryan," she said before they hung up. "Yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to say this kind of thing too early." He waited. "Too bad," she said. "I love you. I just needed to say it. You don't have to—" "I love you too," he said. Not as a response to her permission structure, not as a mirror of her statement, just as a fact that had been present for a while and had found its moment. A silence that had a different quality from any silence they'd had before. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. They got off the phone. He sat in the kitchen for a while. The house was quiet. Emma was asleep upstairs or doing a convincing impression of it. The street outside was the ordinary February dark. He'd said it and meant it, which was the whole of it. Nothing was solved by it. No gap narrowed, no complexity resolved, no future guaranteed. But it was true. And true things had a different weight from careful things, and he'd been carrying careful for long enough that the weight of something simply true was a relief he hadn't expected. He went to bed. In the morning, he told Emma, sitting at the kitchen table over coffee. His coffee, her orange juice, both of them in the specific comfortable informality of the early hour before the day demanded anything. "I told Amelia I love her last night," he said. Emma looked up from her orange juice. "She said it first," he added, which was accurate and which he felt for some reason was relevant context. Emma set down her glass. She looked at him with the steady dark eyes that were her mother's and her own both. She didn't say anything for a moment. He watched her run through something internal. Not just the fact of it, but what the fact meant, where it landed, what it asked of her. "Are you happy?" she said finally. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded, picked up her glass, drank her orange juice, and then, in the way she did things that mattered, without ceremony, without drama, making it simple because the simplicity was the point, she said, "Good. You've been allowed to be happy for a while now. It's about time you noticed." Ryan looked at his coffee. "She's good," Emma said. "She's not perfect, but she's good." She paused. "She counts things accurately, and she came to my soccer game when she didn't have to, and she let you fix her car instead of calling a different service. Those things matter." "Those things matter," he agreed. Emma picked up her backpack from where it was slouched against the chair leg, the same way it was always slouched against the chair leg. "I have school," she said. "I know. Don't be weird about this." "I'm not being weird." "You're making the face where you're trying not to be sentimental." "I don't have that face." "You absolutely have that face." She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, the same gesture as the night after the first date, brief and specific and hers. And then she left, and the back door closed, and Ryan sat alone in the kitchen with his coffee and the ordinary morning light. He was 32 years old in a rented house on Calloway Street, and he was, with some accuracy, happy. Not the large cinematic version, not the resolved version where everything was healed and the numbers were all correct and the grief was complete. Just the specific, imperfect daily version where enough things were right that the things that were still hard didn't overwhelm the sum. He thought this was probably what most happiness actually was. Not a condition, but an ongoing negotiation with what you had. He finished his coffee and went to work. Spring came in March, which in their part of the country meant mostly that the cold became negotiable rather than absolute. Some days still sharp, other days with the first tentative warmth that made people open their garage doors and let the outside in. Ryan opened the bay doors most mornings when the temperature allowed it, which happened earlier in March than in any month since October, and the sound of the neighborhood came into the garage, traffic and birds and someone's dog and the specific acoustics of a residential street waking up. And it changed the feel of the work in a way that was hard to articulate but was real. Amelia came to the garage for the first time on a Saturday in late March. Not officially. Not a service visit, nothing arranged. She texted that she was in the neighborhood and asked if she could stop by, and he said yes, and she arrived at 10:30 in jeans and the green parka and stood in the open bay door for a moment looking at the space before she came in. He was working on a Subaru Outback, a regular customer, Mrs. Kellerman, who had eventually replaced her transmission and was now back for a routine maintenance that Ryan did himself rather than delegating because Mrs. Kellerman was 71 and had told him once that she didn't like strangers touching her car, which he respected. Amelia looked at the garage the way she'd looked at the third-floor service center, with genuine attention, not assessment. She looked at the lifts, the tool arrangement, the parts room door, the corkboard visible through the office window. "This is where you've been for 8 years," she said. "Most of my waking hours," he said. "The better ones, usually." She walked further in. She looked at the Subaru. She looked at the sign on the wall, the original Carter Automotive sign that had been in this building before Ryan put his own above the door, the one that had belonged to the previous owner and that Ryan had kept for reasons he'd never fully articulated, something about continuity, about the idea that places held the work that had been done in them. She noticed the corkboard through the office window. She looked at him. "Can I?" she said, gesturing toward the office. He nodded. She went in. He continued working on the Subaru, listening, not performing nonchalance. He heard nothing from the office for a moment, just her quiet presence in there. She came back out. She didn't say anything immediately, just came and stood near the Subaru and watched him work for a minute. "She looks tired," Amelia said finally. He looked up. "The photo," she said. "She looks tired but happy. Like someone who is both of those things at the same time and isn't trying to hide either." Ryan set down the wrench he'd been using. Yeah, he said. "That's exactly right." Amelia looked at him. "Thank you for leaving it up." "Where else would it be?" he said. She nodded, and something settled between them. Not a resolution, not a conclusion, but a new and more complete understanding. The photo was not a wound, and it was not a threat, and it was not something either of them needed to manage around. It was Diane's face on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, and it belonged exactly where it was. And the woman standing in the garage in the green parka knew this and was fine with it, which told Ryan something about her that he already knew, but that was good to see confirmed in a concrete moment. He finished the Subaru. She sat in the office chair, the old one, with the slightly uneven armrest, and they talked about nothing consequential for an hour, the way you talked when you were in someone's actual daily space, and the conversation could be about anything because the presence itself was the point. She made coffee in his cracked carafe without asking, which he noted as a small and significant thing. She poured it wrong. Too much coffee, the way people who didn't drink it often made it. And he drank it without comment. When she left, she paused in the bay door. "The fluorescent," she said, nodding at bay 3, where the light was holding steady. "Fixed itself," he said. "Lights do that sometimes," she said, with the tone of someone saying something that was about more than the light. "They do," he agreed. She went. He spent the rest of the morning on a truck alignment and an oil change and a brake inspection, and the day was full and real and ordinary. Easter came in April, which Emma negotiated as a combined event. Sarah's family, Ryan's house, Amelia arriving at 2 o'clock after her flight back from a 2-day industry conference in Chicago. This had been Emma's arrangement, not Ryan's. She'd mentioned it to both parties separately with the precision of someone managing a logistics operation. And both parties had agreed, which Emma had reported to Ryan with the carefully neutral satisfaction of someone who had known it would work out. Amelia arrived at 2:15 with a bottle of wine and a box of bakery pastries from a place in the city that Emma had apparently mentioned once in passing months ago, which Amelia had remembered, which was the kind of detail that Sarah noticed immediately and stored. Sarah's assessment of Amelia, delivered to Ryan in the kitchen while the pasta water boiled and Amelia was in the living room talking to Sarah's twin boys about something that was making both of them laugh very loudly, was, "She's real. I was expecting the other thing, the corporate, but she's just real." "I know," Ryan said. "She remembered the pastry place," Sarah said. "I know." "Ryan," Sarah turned from the stove. "She's good for you." "I know that too." "I need you to not just know things," Sarah said. "I need you to actually be in this, all the way." He looked at his sister. She'd been pushing him toward this from the beginning, from the blind date she'd arranged with the relentless conviction of someone who could see something he couldn't. And she'd been right. Not about all of it, not about the how of it or the timeline of it, but about the underlying fact of it. That he had more in him than the 4 years of careful smallness had been using. That Emma's observation at the kitchen table, "Be a little more fine than that," as a direction, had been waiting to be applied. "I'm in it," he said, "all the way." Sarah turned back to the stove, and he could see from the side of her face that she was working hard not to make it into something larger than the moment called for, which was her equivalent of the Emma nod, the satisfaction held at a calibrated distance. Dinner was loud in its way of a full house with 7-year-old twins who had a lot to say about everything and very limited volume control. Amelia sat between Emma and one of the twins. She'd been given this seat by Emma, which was not an accident, and navigated the chaos with the adaptability that Ryan had come to think of as one of her most underrated qualities. She was good in rooms that didn't require her to manage them. She could just be in them. After dinner, while Sarah was managing the twins towards something resembling bedtime preparation, and Emma had retreated upstairs with the post-dinner excuse of homework that might or might not have been actual homework, Ryan and Amelia sat on the back porch in the April evening. The yard was still the mostly dormant brown of a lawn that hadn't fully decided about spring yet. The air was cool and smelled like everything waking up. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for having me," she said. "Your sister is—" "I know." She looked at me like she was taking inventory for the first 45 minutes. "She does that." "I passed, I think." "You passed the pastry test in the first 30 seconds, Ryan said. "Everything after that was formality." Amelia smiled at the yard. "Emma arranged this." "Emma arranges everything she wants to happen," he said. "She just does it subtly enough that you feel like it was your idea." "She gets that from somewhere," Amelia said. He looked at her. "Not from me." "No," Amelia agreed. "From Diane, you think?" "From Diane," he said. Diane could walk into a room and by the time she left, every person in it had done something she'd wanted them to do and was convinced it was their own initiative. He shook his head. "Emma has a less refined version of it. She'll get better at hiding it." "She's already pretty good at hiding it." "Don't tell her that. She'll get worse." Amelia laughed. They sat in the April evening and the yard was quiet, and the house behind them was full of the sounds of winding down. Sarah's voice, the twins' diminishing energy, the sound of Emma's music faint through the upstairs window. "I want to ask you something," Amelia said. "Ask." She turned slightly to face him. She had the look she got when she was about to say something that she'd been organizing for a while, so the look that preceded the direct true things, the ones she'd learned to say out loud. "A year ago," she said, "I would have told you that I'd made a kind of peace with being alone. Not happy about it, just concluded about it, like it was a structural feature of the life I'd built." She paused. "And then a hose clamp." He looked at her. "I'm asking this badly," she said. "What I mean is, I want to know if you're where I am with this. Not the logistics. I know the logistics are complicated and they're going to stay complicated. I mean," she held his eyes. "I want to know if this is something we're building, not just something we're managing." Ryan sat on the back porch of his rented house on Callaway Street in the April evening. He thought about the highway in October, the rain and the steam, and 3 cars that passed. He thought about 43 minutes late at the Meridian Bistro, and the laugh that broke between them when the absurdity of the situation landed. He thought about December and Portland and the SBDC and the Hartwell trucks and the 3 a.m. kitchen and the pastries and Emma's careful 63 and the photo in the office and the coffee made too strong in his cracked carafe. He thought about what Diane had looked like in that photograph, the tired and happy both, neither hidden, and he thought about what it had cost him to let the life get as small as it had gotten, and what it had cost to let it expand again, and whether the cost had been worth it. And the answer to that question was sitting next to him on a cold porch in April, asking him a direct and honest question in the way she asked all direct and honest things. "I'm building," he said. "That's where I am." The relief that moved through her expression was not something she managed. It just happened, quick and real and close to the surface, the kind of thing you only let show in front of people you've decided to trust. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They sat for a while longer. The April dark settled gently, and the house behind them did the things houses did at the end of full evenings. The sounds slowing, the light shifting. Sarah called a goodbye from the back door, wrapped her boys into the necessary logistics of coats and bags, hugged Ryan briefly and Amelia with slightly more warmth than strictly necessary, and left. The house got quieter. Emma came downstairs at 9:30 in her socks, looked at the two of them through the back door window, and made the decision that Ryan could see her making, to leave them alone, and retreated back upstairs, leaving the porch light on as she went, which was the kind of thing Diane used to do, and which Emma did without knowing she did it. Ryan and Amelia sat in the porch light until the April air got too cold for staying. On a Saturday in October, a year, almost exactly, after the highway and the rain and the hose clamp, Ryan drove north on Route 9. He had been planning this drive for about a month without telling anyone except Emma, who had helped him plan it without asking too many questions about why it felt important, because Emma understood why it felt important and didn't need it explained. Amelia was in the passenger seat. She'd been told only that they were driving north, and that it would take about 20 minutes, and that she should wear something for weather, because the weather that day had the same ambitious quality as a year ago, though the rain had not materialized. The sky was doing something dramatic in the west, the same complicated thing, the same potential, but the highway was dry, and the light was the flat October light that made everything look slightly overexposed. She'd figured out where they were going about 3 miles before they got there. He could tell by the way she went quiet. He pulled onto the shoulder at the mile marker he remembered, had never quite forgotten, actually, and killed the engine. They sat for a moment. The highway was the highway. Ordinary and different, moving its traffic north and south in the October afternoon. A spot where nothing distinguished itself from any other spot on Route 9, except that Ryan and Amelia both knew what had happened here and what had come from it. They got out. The wind was doing something with the dry grass on the embankment. A semi passed and displaced the air around them for a moment. In the distance, the sky was making its complicated decision about whether to rain. "Here," Amelia said. Not a question. "Here," he said. She looked up the highway, then down it, then at the shoulder where her Mercedes had been and where his truck had been behind it. She was doing the same thing he was doing, placing the memory in the physical space, checking whether the place matched the thing it contained. It did. Places were like that sometimes. "I thought you were just a person," she said. "I was just a person. I thought you were a stranger I was never going to see again." She turned to face him. "I thought about it on the drive to the restaurant. How there was this," she searched for the word, "this completely regular act of someone being decent, and then that would be the end of it. He fixed my car and drove away, and I'd think about it occasionally, and that would be all. And instead, you had to see me across a restaurant table 43 minutes later," he said. "And instead," she agreed. The sky made its decision. The first rain began. Light, exploratory, nothing like the storm of a year ago. Just the beginning of something. They stood in it for a moment. Ryan was aware of the parallel and did not pretend he wasn't. The rain on the highway, the first time, both of them on their way somewhere and ending up here instead. "I was wrong about something," Amelia said. "About what?" "About what was available to me." She looked at him with the directness she'd always had. The thing that had been there from the first conversation in the rain when she'd said "I almost canceled" and meant every word of it. I had decided. I told myself it was a realistic assessment of my situation, but it wasn't. It was just fear that had been running long enough that it started passing itself off as wisdom. "What were you afraid of?" he asked, though he knew, because she'd told him in pieces across a year. "That it would cost more than I had," she said, letting someone in. I'd built things very carefully. The company, the professional identity, the way I moved through the world, and I was afraid that if I let something real happen, it would find all the places where the building wasn't as solid as it looked. She paused. "And it did. You did. But the building didn't fall. It just—" She tilted her head. "Turned out to have more room in it than I thought." Ryan looked at her in the light rain on the shoulder of Route 9. The thing about a year was that it was enough time to know someone. Not completely. You never got completely, which was also fine, which was part of what kept things alive. But enough. Enough to know the way she went quiet when she was angry versus the way she went quiet when she was sad. Enough to know that she made coffee too strong and ate the Reuben with both hands and remembered small things people mentioned and counted carefully and would tell you the actual number even when 62 was close enough. Enough to know what she'd cost him, which was the comfortable smallness of a life that had been asking nothing of him, and what she'd given him, which was everything he'd been not letting himself want for 4 years. "I have something to tell you," he said. She looked at him. "The garage. There's an opportunity." He'd been holding this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and had decided this was it. Here, in the rain, at the place where everything had started. Carolyn at Hartwell mentioned that their parent company is looking for a regional service partner. Not a franchise, a partnership. I'd stay independent, but they'd route work my way consistently, and I'd have the kind of volume that actually builds something. He paused. "It's a serious conversation, not done yet, but it's real." Amelia looked at him carefully. "Did Hartwell come to you?" "Carolyn mentioned it," he said. "She didn't know your name was connected to how I found the SBDC contact. She said the work was good and the relationship was reliable and her parent company was looking." "Ryan," her voice was careful. "I know you didn't arrange it," he said. "I know. I checked. I called Jackie at the SBDC and asked directly whether anything in the Hartwell referral came through Sinclair channels." He looked at her. "It didn't. You gave me a phone number. The rest was Carolyn's decision based on the work." She held his gaze. "And you checked." "I checked because I needed to know," he said. "Not because I don't trust you. Because I needed to be sure, for myself, that I built it, that Carter Automotive built it." He paused. That's right," she said. "That's exactly right." Something moved through her expression that was not offense, but was the opposite, recognition, and something that looked like respect with warmth underneath. "If you hadn't checked, I'd have been worried about you." He exhaled. "Tell me about the partnership," she said. He told her. The full version, the structure, the terms Carolyn had outlined, the way it would change the garage's capacity requirements, and what that meant for staffing and equipment over the next 18 months. She listened with the total attention she gave to things that mattered, asking the specific questions that demonstrated she'd followed every sentence. When he finished, she said, "It's a good deal. You should take it seriously." "I am, and you don't need my opinion on it." "I know," he said. "I wanted to tell you because it's a big thing, and you're a person I tell big things to. Not for the opinion, just, I wanted you to know." The rain was light on both of them. The sky had decided, not the full October storm of a year ago, but steady now, the kind that was going to continue. "Your father would have liked this," she said. "The partnership." He looked at her. "You told me once that he never had his own place," she said. "That you put his name on the sign because it should have mattered eventually." She met his eyes. "It mattered. Look where it is." Ryan turned and looked at the highway, north and south, the familiar, ordinary, and different road. He thought about his father, who had worked other men's shops his whole life and been good at it, and never had his name above a door. He thought about 8 years and the cracked carafe and the corkboard, and Dale Hutchins coming in every 3 months because he had nowhere to go on Tuesday afternoons, and Ryan understood what that was. He thought about a 14-year-old who covered sleeping people with blankets and remembered to leave the porch light on. He thought about Diane, tired and happy both, coffee in hand on a Sunday morning, looking at the camera like she didn't entirely mind. He thought about what she would think of this, of him, here, in the rain, having taken the life she'd been part of and kept it going and kept Emma going and kept himself going and found his way, eventually and imperfectly and with considerable scenic detours, to something that was both different from what he'd expected and better than what he'd settled for. He thought she would have had notes. He thought the notes would have been kind. Amelia leaned against his shoulder, which she'd started doing in October, and which had become, in a year, the most natural thing in either of their lives. The rain came down on Route 9, and the traffic passed, and the world continued its absolute indifference to the fact that two people were standing on a highway shoulder in October because a year ago a hose clamp failed at exactly the right moment. "The worst night of my year," she said quietly. "Became the best thing," he said. She looked up at him. "I was going to say that," she said. "I know." He looked down at her. "I've been listening to you for a year." She smiled. The real one, the one that lived close to her eyes and didn't have any architecture to it, just the plain fact of it arriving. The rain, the highway, the two of them. "Take me somewhere warm," she said. "Gene's still open," he said. "Same soup he's been making since 2008. "Perfect," she said. "Let's go." They got back in the truck. Ryan started the engine. The wipers moved against the rain. He pulled back onto Route 9, heading north. And the highway was the same highway it had always been. Ordinary, indifferent, long. And they drove through the October afternoon toward the diner and the soup and the rest of whatever came next, which was not finished and not perfect and not guaranteed, but was theirs and was real and was, by any honest measure, more than enough. Behind them on the shoulder, the rain filled the tire marks where the truck had been and erased them cleanly, and Route 9 went back to being just a road, which it had always been, which it would remain long after both of them were gone. But for the length of a year, something had happened on it, and the something had stayed.